Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are on this crazy planet. This is Mark Gray from Normandy, France, and I'm hosting today. I'm very honored and flattered to have a licensed psychotherapist, Jerry Marzinsky. Hi, Jerry. How are you?
Doing good. I didn't know you were in Normandy. I did visit there. I had to go see those beaches.
All right, all right. You're in Tucson, Arizona, right?
I am, and
Okay.
it's hot as Hades here.
I bet. It's a hot summer. You have over 35 years of experience working with schizophrenic and other psychiatric patients in state hospitals, state prisons, and hospital emergency rooms. Today, we'll talk about your background, the background for psychiatric health as well, and we'll talk about your favorite topics on DTV, on Dimensions TV, chemical imbalance, voices in the heads of patients that are real entities and not, simple hallucinations, or and we'll talk about big pharma, the drug industry business that kills any investigations about those entities, and they work hand in hand with demons. We'll talk about this, and we'll also talk about the book that you're co-writing with you co-wrote with Sherry Sweeney, who
Yes.
was my guest here on the show on DTV a few months ago. Let's talk about your background, and so we can actually educate the listeners here in France about why psychotherapy is about in psychiatry in the U.S.
Well, psychiatry in the U.S. is probably the same as it is in France. They just drug these guys silly. They haven't done any research whatsoever on the voices. They have merely proclaimed them to be hallucinations. And what I'm about to tell you tonight is stranger than any fiction. I mean, if I hadn't experienced it myself, I still wouldn't believe it. And I was in denial for years, more than a decade. So, I'm pleased to talk to an audience that has the light to see and hear this, and wherever they came from, whatever they were doing, where they stop and listen to this, they're listening to this. You're listening to this because you're supposed to hear it. There are no mistakes. You have the light to understand. You have the wisdom to understand. A lot of people can't deal with this stuff. I mean, trying to talk to a psychiatrist about this, you get your head chopped off. As I was talking to Mark just a minute ago, it's the French who have been on the forefront of the psychiatric treatment for well over 100 years. It's the French who invented the straitjacket. In 1790, an upholsterer by the name of Juliet invented the straitjacket, and they were just ceasing the use of them when I started working at the Central State Hospital, which was at the time the largest psychiatric hospital on the planet. I mean, there were 13,000 patients there when I got there, and I mean, everything you can imagine was there. And for somebody interested in abnormal psych, for me, it was like a candy store. But I got more than what I more than what I bargained for. And it was Henri Labourette, I think, Labourette, French neurobiologist, who was instrumental in the development of chlorpromazine, which was Thorazine, which is kind of what they're using today, offshoots of Thorazine. Now, Thorazine was pretty rough stuff. And the stuff they're using today causes the same damage, the same nasty side effects. It causes destruction of the peripheral nervous system. It kills brain cells. It turns you into a semi-zombie. But it does weaken the voices, if not always get rid of them. In some cases, it will get rid of them, not often, but it will weaken them where the person can function. That's probably the best treatment they have right now, but they don't have anything to get rid of the voices. They don't know what causes them. They say they're hallucinations.
Yeah, Henri Laborie actually died in 1995, but he was born in Hanoi, Vietnam in 1914. And he's the one who actually, yes, introduced the neuroleptics and in psychiatry. And also the GHB in 1960, that's basically a drug today, an anesthetic for surgery, you know.
Yeah, they were using that for an anesthetic too when they first came out. They were using it as an antihistamine. And Henri died in Paris, and like you said, in 1985. So what I'm going to tell you tonight is stranger than any fiction. I mean, if I didn't experience it myself, I still would believe it. And I was in denial for decades until I just couldn't deny anymore. I mean, it was like, I should have realized it years before I finally couldn't deny anymore. So Central State Hospital, it was sprawled over 2,000 acres, had over 200 buildings, and I was employed there in 1975. It was the largest state hospital in the world. And I was fascinated with abnormal psychology. And this place was chock full of it. Every mental disorder under the sun was there. At the time, in 1950s, it had 13,000 patients, and they were given 3,000 shock treatments a year. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen one of those things, but boy, I almost fainted the first time I did. When I first got there, it was a very strange place. Over 200 buildings, and they were these big brick buildings. And at night, you could hear the screams of the psychiatric patients just echo out into the night. You could see them come to the windows and just stand there. After the first couple of years, right away, I started seeing bizarre stuff. I mean, and the first thing, there weren't any cell phones at those times. Everybody met in the central kitchen for the hospital. That's where all the staff met. That's where all the rumors went. That's where the rumor mill and the grapevine was. And I remember the first really bizarre thing I heard was one of the patients had cut off his penis. And he had done that in a psych unit where one of my friends was working. So the talk of the lunchroom for weeks was whether they sewed it back on, was whether it was going to take or not. And I asked my friend who worked there, I said, Ed, go ahead, dig this guy up and ask him why he did that. And I said, I'll meet you here at dinner tonight. Tell me what he says. So we met at dinner that night. He comes in and he sits down. I said, well, did you ask him? And he goes, yeah, I asked him. Well, what'd he say? He said, I didn't need it. I said, okay.
You guys went on with dinner afterwards?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were bizarre things happening throughout that hospital that made absolutely no sense. They had a building for the criminally insane, and nobody was allowed in there except those staff, and nobody knew any staff who worked there. So I could get into any other psych unit in that hospital except the building for the criminally insane. And I always wondered what was in there. I mean, there was rumors that came out of there. One pilot, I mean, this guy was flying commercial airlines, murdered his wife because he was convinced his wife was turning his son into a homosexual. So he ended up in there, and we heard rumors of that. I found out what was in there later when I went to work for the state hospital, for the state prison. So, there was a lot of bizarre behavior on the part of the patients, and it was always destructive, horrible behavior. One guy slit his wrist and kept his mouth shut while he bled out. And when you walk into that room, there was blood all over the walls, all the way up to the ceiling. And he kept his mouth shut the entire time. So they would do a lot of very bizarre, very destructive things. And that was kind of, they never did anything good. It was always bad stuff. And it was bizarre, self-destructive stuff. And self-sabotaging stuff. And, they didn't tell us much about schizophrenia in graduate school. Matter of fact, I didn't even know they were hearing voices until all they would say were they were hallucinations. They're hallucinating, you know. And I found that, you know, these hallucinations took the part of voices for the most part. And these guys would walk around, they'd be talking to themselves like they're carrying on a conversation with somebody else. Now, one thing in my background, and there's various reasons, various stories behind this, but boy, I came out of my adolescence with a deep distrust of authority. I would distrust first and then look for verification. So one of the things that bothered me about undergraduate school was that you couldn't verify anything they were teaching you. You know, here's all these psych books, and they're saying, well, you have to believe this. And there was no way, like engineers can go into a lab and they can test the physics and the principles, and we couldn't do anything. And then you look in the back of the textbook, and it's like, okay, this guy got this information from this guy, who got it from this guy, who got it from this guy, who got it from this guy. You know, and it's like, you know, it's like intellectual incest. And when I got into graduate school, I found out I'd already spent 7 years at the state hospital working on the front lines before I got into the PhD program. But there were very few professors who actually had hardcore clinical experience. They might have worked in a counseling center or something like that, or briefly in a mental health center. And a lot of them were just academics that didn't have any firsthand experience. So it's kind of like, well, what do they know? And I remember some bizarre things that I read. I mean, there's this one, and this one psychologist said that if two psychotic guys met each other and they both had the same delusion, one of them had to change that delusion to something else. And even as an undergraduate, I'm going, well, what sense does that make? They're both crazy. Why, you know, why shouldn't they have the same delusion? Why, you know, but here's this guy clearly stating one of them has to change. You know, fast forward about, you know, what was that? Maybe 15, 20 years. And I was on the psych ward at the state hospital, and I saw a new guy a new patient, and he was talking to himself. And I kind of crept up on him, and you could hear a conversation. It was like he was talking to somebody. It was like one side of a phone conversation. And I went to check him out because that was part of my job, to interview the new patients who came onto the ward and see if there was anything we could do with them. And I walked up to him. I said, hey, you're new here, aren't you? I go, what's your name? And he goes, I'm Jesus Christ. And I went, oh. I said, no, you can't be Jesus Christ because I am. And I'm sitting there waiting, you know, okay, what's he going to do? Is he going to change his delusion? You know, and I'm waiting. And he looks perplexed. He looks curious. And he goes, yeah, I kind of threw him off a little bit. And then he looks up at me and he goes, well, we can both be Jesus Christ. And he just walked off. I'm like, okay, they lied about that. What else they lie about? You know? And it wasn't long after that where another one came up where I remember reading, oh, schizophrenics are way too disorganized to do any kind of complex planning. You know, they're just too disorganized. They're too messed up. So one day I got a call from my friend in the other unit, and he goes, hey, you got to get over here real quick and take a look at this before they clean it up. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, no, just get over here. So I jumped in my car, drove over to his psych unit, and went over there and opened the door to the psychiatrist's office. And here's this pile of feces in the middle of the psychiatrist's desk, shaped into a pipe. And I'm like, yeah, what's going on there? The psychiatrist in that unit dressed like Sigmund Freud, had a beard like Sigmund Freud, acted like Sigmund Freud, smoked a pipe like Sigmund Freud. And this guy, this patient was 3 floors up. He somehow got down 3 floors, past 3 attendance stations, broke into that psychiatrist's office, got up on the middle of his desk, took a dump and shaped it into a pipe, and then escaped the hospital. And they never caught him. So I'm like, okay, so much for not being able to do complex planning. So what other lies have they told me? You know? So it was like, you know, from the very start. So
Did
here
they put the fake Sigmund Freud into a straitjacket?
I don't know what his reaction was. I suspect they cleaned it up before he got there. So the other strange thing I saw there was the psychiatrist would be assaulted at a rate much higher than any of the other staff. The psych nurses, the counselors, psychologists, the nurses, medical doctors. I mean, they were always getting beat up by psychotics. And I'm like, well, what's with that? I just couldn't explain it. You know, it turned out later that was related to the medicines. And you know, skipping forward 7 years from that point is, as I was about to leave the state hospital, one female patient told me that the voices told her that she was being poisoned by the psychiatrist with these medicines. Yeah. And they were telling her not to take them. So it was like click, you know, that's where all the assaults are coming from. You know, the voices are telling these patients that the psychiatrists are poisoning them. And then you look at the attack rate of those guys. I mean, they, at the state hospital, they only spent 15 to 20 minutes a month with a patient. You know, oh, how's your meds working? Oh, well, I'm still hearing voices. Okay, well, we're going to increase your meds. Or we'll change to another med. It was like, you know, shooting in the dark with a shotgun, just hoping one of them hit. And they were attacked at 3 to 5 times the rate of any other medical staff. You know, and it was equivalent to the attack rate of attendants who spent 24 hours a day with these guys. And I'm like wondering at the time, what are psychiatrists doing to piss these guys off in 15 or 20 minutes where they're being attacked at a rate much higher than anybody else at the hospital other than attendants who are living with them? You know? So it's like they kept going off their meds. I mean, you know, I'm like, why are they going off their meds? It's like they were voluntarily choosing to go insane. So, you know, I'm like, I started asking them, why you're going off your meds? And first I started asking staff. You know, I asked the psych nurses, why are they going off their meds? Well, I remember one nurse said, well, that's just a symptom of the disease. Well, that doesn't help much. You know, they're going psychotic because it's a symptom of the disease. They're going off their meds. And what else was I told? Oh, they don't like the side effects. That was the most reasonable explanation I got. But when you look at it, I mean, the side effects weren't good. You know, they weren't good at all. But when you compare it to being floridly psychotic, which is hell on earth, it didn't make any sense. It was like they were being given the choice between contracting the flu and contracting the bubonic plague, and they were consistently choosing the plague. You know, that flies in the face of I mean, even behavior modification, where, you know, an organism will choose pleasure over pain. I mean, that's just built into the system. Something was going wrong there. So, you know, I watched, you know, watch what they did there. They just drugged these guys up, and that was it. They'd go off their meds and they'd lock them down, drug them up again. You know, they insisted the voices were hallucinations if a patient was found to be hearing voices that were telling him to kill himself. Psychiatrists would jump like, you know, somebody stuck a hot poker in their butt, and they would lock these guys up and drug them down. They took that serious, but they didn't take anything else the voices were saying as serious. Everything else was a hallucination. So they reacted to that hallucination, but they never asked about anything else the voices were saying. They were just convinced they were hallucinations. So here they were reacting to that one hallucination that, you know, had proven true too many times. And they were, you know, it's on their watch, these guys kill themselves, and then, you know, they have to write all these reports and they get into trouble. And so, you know, I'd ask the psychiatrist, well, why, you know, what is happening? And some of them would be on, very few but some would be honest, we don't know what's happening. The rest would say, oh, it's a chemical imbalance. And I'd say, well, you know, how do you don't have any tests? I never see you guys giving any tests. You don't do any lab work. You have no tests whatsoever to determine what is out of balance by how much. You know, how do you know what you're even treating? They didn't like that much. You know, so it was like a shotgun approach. If this meant they would just keep revolving, they had a couple of handfuls of meds and different versions of antipsychotics. If one didn't work, they'd switch to another. They'd increase the dose, decrease the dose. But there were no measurements. There was nothing. They were shooting in the dark.
So chemical imbalance is just pure marketing. That's it.
Yeah, and that's what they're using. Even if you look it up today, even though it's been disproved over and over and over again, clearly disproved. You go to the drug ads and they'll go, well, it's assumed to be a chemical imbalance of the brain. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be. They have no idea. None. You know, there's a correlation between serotonin and the antipsychotics they give. I mean, it's a serotonin reuptake blocker, so it keeps, it does have some neurological effect, but it's only a correlation. It's not a fact. They haven't done any research on the voices whatsoever. This all started with Hippocrates back in ancient Greece that went, well, enough of this witchcraft stuff. I mean, there's things that are causing this. And that worked out marvelously until, in the 1930s with the Flexner report here in the U.S., they had the Standard Oil guy, I forgot what hit that multi-million.
Rockefeller,
and then Carnegie. They got together and they go, well, hey, all these other treatments, they had electrotherapy treatment, they had acupuncture, they had all these other treatments that they were also using in the mental health area, and some of them were work. Tesla's violet ray was one of them. And they got together and they said, okay, if you're going to get any money from us, you're going to teach pure pharmacological stuff. That's it. All this other stuff is out. No naturopathy, no nothing. And they passed a law that if you were going to practice medicine, psychiatry, you had to take these pharmacological things, and any school that didn't offer a pharmacological regimen wasn't licensed, weren't allowed to be licensed. So right there and then they cut off all these other treatments so they could make money off their pharmaceutical industry.
History repeats itself, because in France and Germany just recently they stopped reimbursing homeopathy.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they haven't. I mean, there's a big battle here between that, and a lot of insurance companies won't do that. The medical mafia is trying to rule out all other treatments, and they're not going to like what I have to say at all. So, it's all pharmacological stuff. Now, not to say, these drugs that they use work because they calm the patient down, and that's it. That's why. These voices have to keep them ramped up, and they don't like them being calmed down. So, here they are saying, well, the voices are meaningless. They're hallucinations. So they didn't know anything about them. They were convinced they were hallucinations. They had no studies on them. They probably weren't taught much more about them than I was when I was in graduate school. So the only way to learn anything about them was to ask the patients themselves. Now, they didn't want to talk about them, and there was good reason. So, if you're cruising along and all of a sudden you start hearing voices come into your head telling you all these strange things, and you're going like, what's happening? And you tell your friends go, well, something's wrong with you. You're possessed, or, you're odd, you're weird, and they start backing away. So they go tell their parents, and their parents get all worried and upset and, like, well, something's wrong. I mean, and they take you to a psychiatrist and it's, well, I'm hearing voices, and say, oh, well, you're crazy, you're psychotic, you're a lunatic, you got to take these meds. It's the only treatment we have, and you got to take them for the rest of your life. And they take those meds and they're stunned. I mean, they're just like semi-zombies. There's so many negative side effects to those things. They're, you know, and they dope you up. You can't think straight. So, you know, and when they go to their meeting with the psychiatrist asks, well, how you doing? How your meds doing? Well, I'm still hearing the voices. Well, maybe we should jack these up a little bit until we drown them out. You know, the guy's like, oh, you know, drooling. And I've seen that. I mean, you know, so it doesn't cure anything. They don't cure anything. They're not looking for a cure. They spend less money on schizophrenia research than they do virtually any. Schizophrenia is one of the top 10 world health problems. And they spend less money on it than any of the others, and they're barking up the wrong tree. So, you know, with the experiences these guys had before they got to the state hospital, they don't want to tell anybody about those voices. You know, there's no positive outcome to them talking about them. You know, and I found that, you know, when I first got there, I thought they were hallucinations too. But you know, the more I got them to speak about them, if they saw that you were, you know, actually interested in and not thinking that they were hallucinating, they would actually tell you a little bit about them. So it would be piece by piece, I would learn things about what these voices were telling them. And then I'd use them on the next guy and say, well, I know this much about them. You know, what else can you tell me? And piece by piece, they started filling me in. The picture that they drew was they were consistently negative. They never said anything positive. It was always stuff like, you're no good, you're rotten, nobody loves you, your girlfriend's cheating on you, your wife's cheating on you, your husband's cheating on you, you're stupid, you're crazy, you're, you know, da-da-da. And the voices would come go, and they would tell them, don't tell him anything about us, you know, keep your mouth shut, they're going to lock you up. I mean, the voices would tell them this. So it was nothing good. So I'm like, okay, you know, hallucinations are, you know, they're random. I mean, they're bad, they're good, they're all over the place. You know, what holds these things to a consistently unswerving negative pattern? Why are they always negative? Why are they always destructive? Why are they always awful? What holds them that way? What force keeps them that way? And, you know, it's like, what is it? So it was clear to me that they weren't hallucinations because they ran that fixed pattern. You know, at that time, I knew that.
It reminds me of the channeler's posture. You know, yeah, I've talked to so many channelers who, you know, speak to, well, beings, you know, entities, extraterrestrials, beings of all sorts of all origins, and they actually see them as well as they hear them. You know, but since they don't turn into murderers, or most of the time, or do negative things, they're just into New Age, what they call hallucinations. You know, they're just all around, and they produce all those fake news of you know, the false saviors that comes from space, outer space, the Galactic Federation, and you know, all come save us from this hellish 3D dimensions here, and that's pretty much almost the same in a different pattern. You know. It's not a psychotic voice, but it's something that's being channeled in.
Yeah, yeah. Now there are positive spirits out there, but they usually don't speak in words. They speak in feeling and intuition. And right. And you know, I've seen, I mean, over the years, I've seen so many miraculous things interfere with a lot of these guys committing suicide. I mean, just things would happen that shouldn't have happened. You know, like one guy had a 357 Magnum with all the chambers loaded, put it to his head, click, bang, click, bang. He goes, oh, okay, I got it. You know, another guy had a 45 pistol with one round in it, put it to his head, click, went out to the gun range the next day, and that round went off. You know, one of the most amazing was I was working in the emergency room at this point, and they brought in a lady who had everything was going wrong in her life. I mean, she lost her job, she got divorced, they were taking her kid away from her, she couldn't pay the rent, just everything. She goes, I can't deal with this. I'm going to go kill myself. So she went down to a town, small town where railroad tracks were. She sat there in her car all drugged up and drunk, and she was calling her sister in San Diego, telling her, goodbye. I've had it. I'm leaving. The train was coming. So as the train's approaching, she goes around the barrier and stops in the track, and the train blew its horn and blasted into her car and knocked it onto the next track. All right. So another train is coming in the other direction. That one hit her too and knocked her for about 100 yards off the railroad track. The car was a crumpled, piece of garbage, and she couldn't get out, so they had to cut her out. With those jaw things, so they cut her out. The only thing she had was like a black eye. That was it. So here she is sitting in front of me in the emergency room, and I'm doing a psych eval on her, and I said, I found her not to be suicidal at the time, and I asked her, I said, well, what were you thinking when you came to in the car and you were still in there and in this crumpled piece of metal? I said, what were you thinking? She goes, I was furious. She said, I was absolutely furious I wasn't dead. Yeah. And then she said she felt this, she heard this voice call her name. And then she said she just felt this warm, loving feeling like she was being embraced. And she said she knew everything was going to be okay at that point. Yeah. So you just don't survive something like that. And
maybe it wasn't their time. Maybe there's some kind of predestination and to all the souls trapped into our craterers down here, and there's a time frame that's
well, I think there's something to that. There were another guy, he went out way out in the woods in the middle of nowhere to hang himself, and he was dangling from a tree, and a hunter appeared out of nowhere, came cut him down. Another one shot herself in the chest with what she said was a .357 Magnum. And here she is sitting in front of me in the emergency room with like a big Band-Aid on one side and another one on the other side where the bullet went right through her. I'm like sitting there going, so there are positive spirits out there. I mean, they're, and I've heard stories where they, the patients saying they're fighting with one another, Right. But, back to it's kind of like there's a positive and negative valence or charge. And the schizophrenics are way over on the negative side. So
do you think the drugs are actually opening up even wider their, I guess their their frailties,
there's one drug that does that worse than any other. I mean, it's one of the most dangerous drugs out there. I've seen more prisoners and patients go, and back in the state hospital days, it wasn't as prevalent, but the state prison is full of prisoners who have gone psychotic on methamphetamine. The prisoners called it the devil's drug. It does something that just blows them wide open and allows these things in, and the way they experience it is like, oh yeah, I'm high, they feel good, they have lots of energy, they're off buzzing around, and they start seeing something called the shadow people, and I'm still not sure what they are. They're three-dimensional shadows in the shape of human beings most of the time. Sometimes they take the form of animals. And then I found, I started questioning the prisoners about those. Well, what are they? How do they operate? And they said, well, they just come into the room, they walk through walls. I mean, and this is all of them saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. Guys that don't know each other, never met one another, never saw one another, all saying the same story. And the same thing coming in from the ER, shadow people. They show up and they stand there at the foot of your bed and they're looking down at you, or they're walking around your room at night and you can see them. And then I found out the more I questioned them was that if they saw their eyes and their eyes were either red or lime green. I found that interesting. No other color. And the ones who saw their eyes were in much more trouble than the ones that didn't see any eyes. You know, they were much more addicted. And one of the most interesting prisoners I dealt with was one who ran an experiment with these things. Him and his buddy were both using massive amounts of amphetamine, and they wanted to know if they saw the same thing. Now, one thing all the prisoners said is that if they noticed them, and they'd call them the tree people, because lots of times they saw them sitting in trees, and they all said that if you stood there and you stared at them, they would come down and start moving toward you, which was enough to usually scare them off. So I only talked to one or two who said they felt them walk through them, and they could feel them as they walked through. But I never, there's only one instance where I think they possessed this one guy, and he'd been using amphetamine for 10 years. He walked into the ER one night. That was a real spooky, that was real scary. But this guy went to do an experiment with his friend. They went out to a local Indian reservation here in Arizona in the middle of the night, and in a pickup truck. And they wanted to see if they were both seeing the same shadow people or whether they were seeing different ones. And that got my interest immediately. I'm like, well, tell me about this. What happened? How'd you do this? So one of them, they both went out in the truck together in the middle of nowhere, this Indian reservation. One of them shot up with amphetamine, and he started seeing the shadow people. The other guy stayed straight, and he would say, well, do you see that one over there? What's he doing? I don't see him. Well, there's another one over here. You see him? So after a few times of that, they realized that they needed the meth to see these things. So apparently it sped them up to a different vibration where they were aware of these suckers. Normal people can see them out of the corner of their eyes. They just see a black flash sometimes, and they look and there's nothing there. So they both shot up the meth, and they're both standing there all drugged up, and they go, well, okay, there's one over there. What's he doing? Well, he's doing this. How about that one over there? What's he doing? Well, he's doing. So they both saw that they were seeing the same thing. And as they were standing there watching these things, I mean, the rule is, what everybody's saying is they come in on you if you're paying attention to them. So before they knew it, they were surrounded by these things. In a big circle, they were all around them. And they got in the truck, locked the doors, and they were watching from inside the truck as these things came in, and they started crawling on the truck. And then the guy said that the back of the truck suddenly went down like a giant boulder had been dropped in it, and the front of the truck went up. And I'm like, holy cow, you know, because here I am thinking, well, these things are like ghosts or something. They can't affect physical reality. And when I heard that, I mean, like red lights went on. I'm like, oh. And the guy looked back, and he said the whole back of the truck was full of these things. And I said, what'd you do? And he said, well, we stepped on the gas and we blew out of there, almost wrecked the truck, you know, getting out of there on that dirt road. And I asked him, well, did they follow you? And he said, no, they didn't. Yeah.
Wow. Mm.
So I'm still not sure what they are, but you know,
there seems to be several classes of shadow beings, you know, being reported, and I think I heard a show on Coast to Coast Radio once. You know, there are the ones with the hooded ones. They're the ones that are looking smoky, and the ones who are more ghostly, you know, and they interfere with our reality here. But you know, it's just there seems to be several classes or several types of, and the ones with the red eyes, those seem the scarier ones.
Yeah, the red and the green eyes, and they never speak. You know, for years they would say they don't say anything. They just stand there. They don't talk. And then one day I was, this was like Christmas Eve. I was working in the ER, you know, and I really didn't want to be there. It was fairly quiet, and this one meth addict came in, and he was shaking like a leaf. You know, he was just shaking like a leaf from the time he got there until I got to evaluating him. I brought him into the office, and we started talking, and he said he's been using meth for 10 years. And I'm like, 10 years he's been injecting meth? He should be dead by now. I'm like, you know, so that intrigued me. I was like, what are you doing still alive? I mean, you know, and right away I'm like really I need to know about this guy. So I started asking him questions. Well, you ever seen the shadow? Oh yeah, I see them all the time. You see their eyes? Yeah, they're red. Yeah. Said, just out of curiosity, I said, you ever hear him speak? And he goes, yeah, I heard him speak. And that was the first guy I ever talked to who heard him speak. And I said, well, what did they sound like? And he came across with this high-pitched, squealy voice that just gave me shivers just listening to him mimic it. And I'm like, whoa. And I'm like, well, what did they say? And he said, they told me to go jump in front of a car and I wouldn't get hurt. And then all of a sudden his eyes just turned black. I mean, they were like this black pools of hatred. And he went perfectly still. So here he'd been shaking for 2 hours uncontrollably, and he goes perfectly still, and he's staring at me with these eyes that look like black pools of hatred. I mean, they were just, they just seemed to go forever into this blackness, and this hatred came out of them. Like, the feel I got is like, I'd rather slit your gut open than tell you one other word. But it didn't say anything. It just stared at me. And one thing I learned over all these years is you can't show any fear. So I just sat there and stared back at it. And it was like, holy shit, just keeping that gaze. And I'm like, how long is this going to last? And then boom, it went out just like a light going off. And he came back and he started shaking again.
Wow.
And
that's clearly
like,
a case of
holy
possession.
shit.
It's a possession case.
Oh yeah, no doubt. But I wanted to know what these things told him and what he did. But I was pretty well shaken up at that point, because whatever that was, it felt to me like it had a whole hell of a lot more power than I did. I was doing good just not to be attacked, I thought, but I had to know that bit. So I'm like, well, what did they tell you? What did they tell you? What happened? He goes, well, they told me to jump in front of a car on the highway and I wouldn't get hurt. I said, well, what happened? What'd you do? And he goes, I went and I jumped in front of the car. And did you get hit? And yeah, I got hit. I got thrown on the side of the road. And I said, well, were you hurt? And he goes, no, they were standing around me when I landed and they said, get up, you're not hurt. And I said, well, what happened? And then that thing came back again, and I said, what he told me right before it came back was he stood up and he wasn't hurt. He said he did it 2 other times and he wasn't hurt. And then that thing came back again and I just couldn't, I'm like, holy shit. After I stared it down and it went away again, I thought, get out of here, get out of here, and I admitted him to the hospital. And then the psych nurse came in a few minutes later and said, I can't deal with him. What'd you get? What'd you find? And I'm like, whew. That's the only time that, so what happens with the amphetamine is they start seeing the shadow people, then they start hearing voices and they think those voices are hallucinations, just like they're told. And that goes on for a while. They start hearing these nasty voices. And then when they come down, the voices go away. It goes on for a while. And then one day they don't. They're there forever. And they're psychotic. And they're just as psychotic as a bed bug. And it's for life. That is a very, very dangerous drug.
Mm. I've heard you, I think it was on the Freeman TV show, talk about a case of an entity that was invisible, but that you felt or saw or heard crawl up the wall in a room.
Oh yeah, I'll never forget that one. What I did when I was in the prison is, okay, at the state hospital, the underlying unwritten rule is you don't upset psychotic patients for any reason. And I found that asking them questions about the voices upset them. And I found out years later that the voices didn't like having questions asked about them. They didn't want people to know about them. They wanted everybody to think they were hallucinations, just like psychiatry said. Then they can operate unimpeded. So there were a couple of times where the patient got upset and he went to the psychiatrist and said, well, he's asking me about my voices and he's upsetting me. And I get hauled before the psychiatrist and ordered not to do that again because I was making the patients worse. And I didn't see that I was making them worse. I mean, they did get upset, you know, but I didn't see them any worse for the matter. That happened twice. I was told by psychiatry not to ask patients about their hallucinations because I was just reinforcing them, you know. And, you know, they'd get so upset, and then the psychiatrist would like, oh, we don't want to upset these guys. And, you know, there's some good reason for that. You never know what they were going to do, you know, and they were beating up psychiatrists. I mean, they were beating up psychiatrists at a rate far, far greater than they were anybody else.
Oh.
So what I did when I got to the prison is, you know, just kind of kept under the radar. I knew what psychiatry would do if they found it out. But the noise level in the prison, the amount of uproar and noise and conflict and garbage going on was 10 times worse than it was at the state hospital. You know, there were gangs and there were fights and there were, you know, the understaffed. And so a patient going to psychiatry or guard saying, oh, well, he's upsetting me because he's asking me about my voices. That would be like, that wouldn't even meet to break the ambient noise level in that place. You know, so I was free to experiment and ask about the voices all I wanted. And what I did is I always had around me a group of maybe 10 or 12 prisoners who I agreed to work with and give extra special time to, and they wanted to know what their voices were as bad as I did. You know? And I would ask them questions, and the deal we had was that they would need to tell me in real time what the voices were saying as I was talking to them. You know, what the voices were telling them in response to what I was telling them to do, in response to what I was saying, in response to the things we were experimenting with.
Do you remember what they were doing time for? Most of them?
Most of the time I didn't want to know because that would bias me. But I do have some case records that I did dig up for you. Mm-hmm. And a couple of those are prisoners that talk about what they were doing time for and what their background was. Now, normally their background is horrendous. So I'd get a prisoner who did something awful. I mean, just awful. And those cases where I needed to go check into his background, I would look through it and it would just be, they were tortured. They were abused badly. They were sexually abused. They were physically abused. They were mentally abused. You know, I think Sherry might have told you some of that she went through. You know, but it was usually very awful stuff. You know, and not in all cases. I mean, there are some cases where they all of a sudden they would just appear. You know, there was one case where the person was telling me they were at their house at night and they heard this wind coming, and it slammed into their house, and then something entered the house, and it was like a tornado, and they were in the middle of it, and then the voices started, just like that. There was others where they start suddenly. There's others where they start slowly. One guy was saying when they started, they would tell them to pick up a pen or you know, walk into this room. It was like somebody driving a car trying to figure out how much control it had over the car. So you were asking about that one case. That was a guy I was with. He was a prisoner, and he was doing well. I mean, we found out that the voices didn't like the 23rd Psalm, you know, and it's like you would think if they were hallucinations, what would it matter? No, they reacted consistently negative to the 23rd Psalm. They hated it. They didn't like the guy repeating it. They'd make him lose the papers. They'd make him, you know. So there were all these different things we were experimenting with, one of which was a rubber band, you know, so the voices would kind of carry away. So anything I found that they didn't like, that the voices didn't like, I would teach the patient and say, try this and tell me what happens. So one guy came in one day, he said, well, you know, my voices reacted to the 23rd Psalm like worms being thrown on a hot frying pan. And I went, oh, okay, well, let's see, you know, so I started giving it out, and the response was the same among all these different schizophrenics. Yeah, they hate it. They don't like it. They react very negatively toward it. They tell me to stop it. And so anything that they didn't like, I would throw at them more. Yeah. And I only could get away with that in the prison.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What did you say, the 23rd song? Pardon my French.
Psalm in the Bible.
Oh, okay. That's
Yeah, the
Psalm.
23rd
All right.
Psalm in the Bible.
23rd
They,
Psalm.
they,
All right.
they
All right.
hated
All right.
that. They hated the Lord's Prayer. They hated the song Amazing Grace. Matter of fact, they hated any positive spiritual anything. They didn't want these people dealing with. They didn't want them going to church. You know, and that's one of the first things I noticed too that was very odd when the preacher in the psych rehab center at the state hospital would have an ice cream social. All the other patients would go down and enjoy the ice cream social. My schizophrenics stayed on the ward. You know, time after time, they did not want to be around preachers. They didn't want to go to church. And I'm going, well, if they're hallucinations, well, why don't they want to go to church? I mean, a hallucination that doesn't want to go to church? What's the deal there? Then I found out by questioning them that there were different levels, both of what they perceived the voices to be and how strong the voices were. So I started asking them questions about church, and a lot of them were atheists. They didn't want anything to do with the Bible or God or anything like that. But the ones who had weak voices, who tried to go to church, and these were weak voices, as soon as they entered the church, the voices would disappear. I found that odd. The ones who had moderate strength voices, those voices would complain and bitch and whine the whole time they were in church and block out whatever the preacher was trying to say. You know, so they couldn't pay attention because these voices were screaming and hollering in their head. They didn't like him being there. They'd mock the preacher and say he's a goofball and a nutcase and don't listen to anything he said and that there was no God. And why would a hallucination do that? And this is consistent. And then there's the stronger ones that would actually drive them out of the church. They would get up and run out of the church, just bolt out of the church. And, you know, I found that very odd. So when I found out the 23rd Psalm, they didn't like that. I would give them anything that I found they didn't like. I would give to the patient and say, try this and tell me what happens. So the 23rd Psalm was one of those. So I started handing out copies of the 23rd Psalm, and the response was consistent. The voices hated it. In all the patients, they hated it. They didn't like it. They would lose them. The next time they came in the office, they didn't have them. They'd forget to repeat them. And it was like the voices would carry them off into a different direction. And even though they had it in their pocket, they would forget to repeat it. And the ones who could repeat it, it felt like some little victory over the voice. It was like, okay, here's something we can do that they don't like, you know, and we have something to fight back with. It wasn't much. So we needed a way to shut the voices up. And at that time, I didn't know how to do that. But I read a book by, it's called 30 Years Among the Dead.
Right.
Yeah, where this guy, he was a psychiatrist. He used static electricity to drive the voices out of the patient.
Carl Wicklund.
Carl,
right?
yeah, Carl Wicklund. And I remembered from the state hospital that when the psychotic patients were given shock treatments, the voices would disappear for, you know, a day, 2 days, a week. You know, they didn't like being shocked. But I couldn't do that at the prison. And I'm kind of thinking, okay, what can I use that would be a reasonable facsimile? And one day I'm standing in front of talking to a secretary, and I see this big rubber band on her desk. And I go, maybe that would work. You know, I grab it, and then I give it to one of the patients, and I said, okay, I know they distract you from repeating the 23rd Psalm. They make you lose it. Okay, when you start hearing them, grab this rubber band and snap it on your wrist. Snap it hard and let me know, because Wicklund said that the voices in his patients responded to those static electric shocks like painful lightning storms. And they would shut up and they'd be driven out. So I'm thinking, well, the closest thing to a shock that I can administer is a rubber band. And I found out when I handed out rubber bands to these guys, when they snapped them, the voices shut up for 15, 20 seconds, sometimes 30 seconds, long enough for them to repeat the 23rd Psalm, which the voices didn't like. Yeah. And we had something that was starting to work. Yeah. And it was like inch by inch by inch. It was stuff like that we would try, and then they would give me the feedback on it. And eventually we got to where we were actually weakening them. Now the chief psychologist, when he found out that I was doing that, he ordered me to stop. Stop giving the 23rd Psalm, stop giving out rubber bands, you know, just stop. And I'm like, well, wait, it works. I don't care. Stop. So I'm like, so in this case that you're talking about, we got to the point to where the voices were getting weaker and weaker and weaker with the number of the things we found that would cause them to lose ground. And one of those things was the virtually everything they told the patient was a lie. You know, I'd ask them. Now Sherry found that, and she wrote it in a very concise form in her program. But we were working with the same concept. And I tell the patient, well, do you believe anything they say? And they go, well, no, really, they lie all the time. Well, then why do you listen to them? Why do you, you know, well, they're so damn persistent. So, you know, what we needed was something to shut them up so they could repeat the 23rd Psalm. And then this lie thing where they convince them that they're telling them lies and to disregard those lies, and they would start weakening. You know, along with some other stuff that we were using. And all of a sudden, all these schizophrenics I was working with started coming to my office and saying the voices are getting pissed off with you. I'm like, what? They're getting pissed off with me? It was like getting personal. Yeah, they're really getting pissed off. And they're all saying the same thing. Yeah, the voices are getting pissed off with you. They're telling me you're a jerk and you're stupid and not to listen to you and don't keep your appointments. And, you know, I'm like, well, that's interesting. Here's a hallucination telling me da-da-da-da. And
you were on the right track.
yeah. So I was getting resistance. So anytime I got resistance, I knew I was on the right track. So the same guy, he comes in and he goes, I think it was the same guy, but this same guy came in and said, the voices want to talk to you. He didn't have an appointment. And an agreement I had is if they needed to come in, they could tap on my window if they were running into trouble with the voices, and I'd get them in as soon as I could after that. So this guy comes in without an appointment. He goes, he's getting better. And he goes, the voices want to talk to you. And I'm like, they want to talk to me personally? He goes, yeah, they want to talk to you. That never happened before. They were, all before that, like the patient was the intermediary. The voices would say to them, and then they would tell me what the voices were saying, and I'd tell them, well, tell the voices to go jump in a lake and soak their heads and get out of my face, and it went on that way. They never addressed me personally. So I sat down and I'm like, this is a strange twist. And I said, well, sit down. What do the voices have to say? And these words came out of his mouth. You have no right to interfere with our way of life.
No, you know what? Your connection is lagging. Since you talked about that, when you said no way, can you repeat that? You have no way.
There's always electronic interference. I haven't done one of these things where there wasn't. You know. So, you know, when I asked him what the voices had to say, they came out and his voice changed, just got a little deeper. And what came out of his mouth was, you have no right to interfere with our way of life, our plural. You know, so that wasn't the patient talking. And then the guy says, that wasn't me. I didn't say that. The voices said that. And I'm like, whoa, you know, it's like do 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 do, like Twilight Zone.
Right.
So the one where the crackling took place was one where I noticed there was a consistent lack of energy after the voices attacked. These guys were drained. When the voices attacked, they were just, it was like they were working out in the hot sun all day. And, you know, I'd ask them, what'd you do? Well, no, I was laying in bed all night. You know, so I'm seeing a consistent energy drain every time these things attacked. And I don't know why, and neither do they. You know, now they didn't even notice it unless I brought it up to them. And when I brought it up to them, they would say, oh yeah, my energy's gone. And I'm like, where'd it go? And they would consistently say, well, I don't know. I said, well, did you use it? And again, no, I was laying in bed all night. I mean, you know, every time, and I said, every time the voices come and hit you, you're drained of energy. Yeah, it was consistent. So I thought for years that this was because of, you know, they instill fear and trepidation and anxiety, and they're awful. You know, they're just awful. So I thought it was the anxiety that did that, until one day I was assigned to the jail for the prison. I always got assigned to the nastiest units, and I kind of liked that because I was an adrenaline junkie. And there was a prisoner who had snitched off the Aryan Brotherhood gang, and they were trying to kill him. They already stabbed him once, and they were shooting these notes under his door. Matter of fact, they wanted him dead so bad that they got in trouble so they could be sent to the jail, the central detention unit, so they could have a chance to kill this guy. That's how bad they wanted him dead, because a lot of them got sent to other prisons and they lost all their drugs. He was housed with another inmate who was floridly psychotic. And I got a letter from the captain of that unit saying, you need to come over here and do something with this. This sane guy is, you know, he's in trouble. You need to do something with this psychotic guy, because he's standing over his bed at 3 a.m. staring down at him. So if you can imagine a florid psychotic, you wake up and here's this guy standing in the dark peering down at you. They're locked in the same cell. So there wasn't, I mean, it was a perfect experimental situation. Everything was consistent. They were in the same cell being fed the same food. They had the same guards. They had the same environment. Everything was equalized. And as I watched them come up the steps out of the cell block to the interview room, the guy who the guards, the gangsters were trying to kill, he looked like Superman, man. He just bounded up those steps and walked up, and he had plenty of energy in the interview room. And you couldn't be under much more pressure than he. Here's these gangsters trying to kill him, and he's locked in the cell with this psychotic guy who's standing over him at night. And he doesn't know what's going to happen to him. He couldn't leave his cell without an escort. You couldn't be under that much more pressure unless you were in war. So this guy bounded back, came in, and then I watched the schizophrenic come out, and he could barely make it up the steps. And he comes in, and he just slow speech, no energy whatsoever. And it was very clear that it wasn't the anxiety. You know, it wasn't that. So I'm like, okay, if it isn't the anxiety, then what is it? Where's that energy going? You know? So I started experimenting with that, and I would give these guys a scale, 1 to 10 scale. How much energy do you have before the voices come? How much energy do you have after the voices hit you? And then I think we ran an analysis of variance on that, and it came out as statistically significant. They had a statistically significant less energy after the voices struck them. So I'm like, well, where's that energy going? And then I'm reading a book one day by Miguel Ruiz. He's a shaman, a South American shaman. And it said that he was talking about entities that pretty much matched what I was dealing with the psychotic prisoners. And he was saying that they steal the energy. That's what they live off of. They feed off of that energy. So I brought that book into the prison, and I called this one guy in who was getting better. And I would ask him all kinds of questions about the voices, as I always did. And I said, you know, Michael, I got this book by a shaman. I want you to tell me what you think about what he's saying here. And I started reading that paragraph where it talked about these entities stealing the energy from these people. And no sooner had I read a couple of sentences, I'm hearing static now. That's interesting. No sooner had I read a couple of sentences that I look over at him, and he's like got this glazed look on his face. I mean, he's just like, you know, just kind of staring at me, just still. And I'm like, uh-oh, what's going on with him? And then I hear this electrical crackle behind my head, like an arc welder, you know, like crack, 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 crack. And, you know, I look around, I don't see anything. And I'm like, this guy's going to attack me. And I'm in the medical unit, and they always put a female guard in the medical unit. So if they go after you, you're on your own, really. And so it goes up the wall to my right. It's like crack, 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 all the way up to, and I'm looking between the wall and him, because I'm thinking he's going to come at me. And I push my chair against the back wall, so if he does come at me, I could kick him back. And I'm looking at the wall and then looking at him. That, you know, I'm like, okay, he's going to attack, but what is this? And I don't see anything. I don't smell anything. I just hear it. It's just electrical crackling, crack, 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 crack. And then it goes up over the ceiling, over his head, you know, so I can keep an eye on it then because I can see him and that at the same time almost. And then it comes down the wall again. And I'd look at him, I said, "Do you hear that?" And he just stares at me like blank, you know, like, you know, just staring with this glazed look on his face. And it's crack, 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 crack down the wall into this Rubbermaid trash can at my left leg. And, you know, I look down in there and it's clean as a whistle. There's nothing in it. You know, the inmate porter had cleaned it the night before, and here's this crackling in there. And then all of a sudden it went out. And I'm like stunned. I mean, I'm like absolutely stunned. And I'm looking at him and he gets up real slow like a zombie and he goes, "I gotta leave." I'm like, "Yeah, you go, get the hell out of here." You know, so he struggles down the hall and I'm like, I'm in shock. I mean, I'm just in shock. It's like I didn't think these things could affect physical reality. I thought they were like in the guy's head and they couldn't come out. You know, so the first inkling I got that they might be able to do that, something like that, was when that one prisoner told me about the rock hitting the back of the truck and the truck rebounding. So I'm like, okay, I already had that in the back of my mind, but I'm still thinking, no, they can't come out of them. They're stuck in the psychotic patient. They can't come out of there. You know, they can't get me. They might be able to convince him to attack me, but you know, I was pretty sensitive to where they were, and even though they told them to attack me a number of times, that had never happened. So it took me. I was so scared. I mean, I was shocked, and there was nobody I could talk to. I mean, you can't go, "Hey, boss," you know. I was sitting there talking to this psychotic guy. My office erupts in static, like a, you know, "Oh yeah, I think you're losing it, man. We're gonna lock you up." So there's nobody to talk to. You know, you couldn't talk to anybody about that. I couldn't even talk to my wife about that. Anytime I tried to bring anything up to her like that, she goes, "Oh, I don't want to hear it. You know, you do your deal. I don't want to hear it." You know, so it's like, oh man, so I'm stuck with it. And it felt like I was going crazy, because I definitely heard it. I experienced it, you know, and it's like, am I going nuts? Am I losing my mind also? And there was nobody to talk to. I dared talk to about it, just like the schizophrenics. They don't dare talk to anybody about this stuff. The only people who understood it were the patients themselves, you know.
Right.
So, you know, it's like that. It's a different reality. So it took me probably, I don't know, what it was, like 2 months or something like that. You know, it was many weeks before I got the courage to call this guy back and have the guards bring him back to my office. And when I did, he looked good. I thought for sure he was going to be deteriorated, and he would stop his exercises and he would be in bad shape, and they would have complete control of him and he'd look like a zombie. And it wasn't that way at all. He was looking good. I mean, how you doing? He's doing well. I'm doing the exercises. They don't have full control anymore. I still hear them, but I'm doing okay. And I was surprised. I was shocked. And after some small talk, I said, "Do you remember when you were in my office the last time?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Did you hear that crackling, that electric crackling?" He goes, "Yeah, I heard it." He said, "But I was surprised that you did." And I'm like, "What was that?" And he says, "That was them." And I said, "Them who?" He said, "The voices." And I said, "Well, what were they doing?" You know, so that was like another punch in the face, you know, when he said the voices, because I didn't think they could do anything like that. You know, I, like I said, I thought they were stuck in the guy's head and they couldn't come out. And yeah, he goes, "Yeah, that was the voices." I said, "Well, what were they doing?" And he went, "They were trying to scare you." And I said, "Well, they did a damn good job of it." You know, and I remembered back to him getting up and looking like a zombie. And I said, what were they telling you when you left my office? And he said, "They were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your gut." A shank is a homemade prison knife, you know. And I'm like, you know, I'll come, "Well, I've worked with this guy for 6 months. He wouldn't do anything like that." So just out of lark, I said, "Well, why didn't you do it?" He turns around and he goes, "I couldn't find one." And I'm like, whoa. I mean, you know, it was like my denial system collapsed the first time when the voices said, you have no right to interfere with our way of life. That's when I knew they weren't hallucinations. That's when I knew they weren't the patient. They were something different than the patient. You know? But then there was nobody I could talk to about that either, except that guy, you know, that particular patient. But this, I couldn't talk to anybody about this,
Yeah.
you know, except him.
When they mention they're plural, means there's a whole community of voices and entities attached to them.
Yeah, there's some of them who report hearing one or two voices. There's some who report hearing hundreds. And the more they're infested with, the less chance they're going to recover. Yeah. And also what they think they are is another story. The ones who know that the voices aren't who they are, they know there's something else. You know, they know that their intent is different from the intent of the voices, and that these things are foreign invaders. They're the ones that are going to do the best. You know, they're the ones who have something to fight against. Then there's the ones in the middle who are confused. They're not quite sure what they are. They don't know whether they're them or something else. They're confused about it. And the ones that are the very, very worst off are the ones who believe what psychiatry say, that they're hallucinations, that they're not real, that their minds are broken, that they have to take these meds for the rest of their life, and that their case is hopeless. You know, those are the guys who are the ones that are not going to recover. You know, now, if they recover, the pharmaceutical industries and the medical mafia don't make any money. You know,
right.
So
they lose
not
clients. They lose clients.
Yeah, they lose clients, especially when these things this can be cured for free. You know, if you know what to do about it, and that's one of the things Sherry and I are doing with that book. We found some mistakes. We had to go back, and we're working on it again. But it's coming soon, and it'll tell them what these things are and what they can do about it. You know, the main things they can do about it.
We'll talk about that in a future interview, right? An upcoming interview with both of you guys, Sherry and yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's some similarities with gang stalking a little bit. Don't you think?
With
Gang stalking. You know, it's an umbrella term describing a series of techniques utilized by a group to instill mental instability within a victim with the intent to discredit, sabotage, harass, extort, and even drive a victim to suicide.
Well, you got that, but the one that I think matches the closest is what armies do to prisoners of war. You know, they lock them up, they isolate them, they abuse them, they starve them. You know, they hammer away at them until they start cracking, and the voices are relentless. You know, and they will not be ignored. You know, the psychiatrists will, well, ignore them. What happens when they ignore them is they get louder. Mm-hmm. They will not be ignored, and that's consistent. You know, if they try to ignore them, they get louder. You know, another similarity is like farmers who milk cows. So, you know, they get the patient goes out, he eats food, generates more energy, and then these things come and they isolate him. And that's one of the worst things you could do with these guys is isolate them, because the voices just have free access. There's no interfering. And then they just milk them dry, you know, like we milk cows. And then you let them go back out and eat food. And then when they generate more energy, come back, and what they do is insert negative thoughts into their thought stream, you know. And
so it's all trauma based basically, and it generates loosh energy.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Loosh. That I forgot who wrote that, but that's right on. I did read it.
Robert Monroe. In the journey, the far.
But I think he got it from somebody else.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, who talked about that. But yeah, that's what it is. It's and you look at it on a global scale. I mean, look at the television, look at the news, look at the garbage we're being told, look at the lies we're being told, you know. And one of the things that they got going for them is nobody believes this. You know, nobody believes that these are entities and they're separate. and they get everybody. They don't just get psychotics. They get everybody. Every negative thought you have that comes through your mind about yourself or anybody else is instilled there from them. And one of the big fallacies, one of that the world needs to wake up to, is that you are not your thoughts. And people think they are their thoughts. You're not your thoughts. You can sit back and you can watch your thoughts come into your head. You can watch them appear. You can watch them disappear. If you can stand back and watch them come and go, then who's the watcher?
Right.
All of us have voices in our heads all the time, talking to us, saying all kinds of garbage. And if you listen to your thoughts for a while, 90% of it is just trash. It's like garbage that, you're going to the past, you're going to the future. It doesn't matter much what, it doesn't produce anything. It doesn't make your life better for the most part. It's just garbage that's going through your head. Who's listening to it? Who's the listener? So once you separate yourself from your thoughts, then you can start watching them. You can start studying them. And that's kind of what we did with schizophrenics, and they're getting us all. They can smell negative emotional energy like a shark can smell blood, and they just come and they dump gasoline on it. And if you know how to use them, they're useful because they will go after your psychic wounds. They'll go after those traumas that you experienced in your life, those ex-girlfriends, all the things you feel guilty about. They can go in there and they can pick anything out of your memory. I've had patients tell me they go in there and they pull up stuff that they've forgotten for 20 years. They hadn't thought about it in 20 years, and the voices bring it up and say, "Hey, you remember when you did that?" So Castaneda talks about that too.
It's sort of like the life review during NDEs, near-death experiences. You see your life review, but the life review shows you a lot of your traumas and a lot of good things, but bad things. So it's basically trauma-based to make you come back and feel guilty about it, so you come back and reincarnate or go back to life in prison.
Yeah, or you can use it like, okay, I know I have this trauma. They're picking on it. They're constantly bringing it up, throwing it in my face. It's like when you remunerate about something. It's kind of, you do something was stupid, and it didn't work out real well, and then you're kicking yourself in the butt for hours. Like, I shouldn't have done that. That was really dumb. That was really embarrassing. Or that was, and you just, we're the only animal on the planet that does that. And here's these things, they keep that going as long as they can because it's generating negative emotional energy, which is what they feed off of. So you look at these TV programs. I mean, here's war and killing and bad news and murder mysteries, and by the time a teenager in the U.S. gets to be a teenager, he's already watched like 30,000 murders on TV. And then they go, oh, why are people shooting each other? There's no correlation between that and violence. Bull crap, there ain't. And here's these guys making a fortune doing that because it sells.
The new trend these days are those escape games. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's more than symbolic. I mean, escape game is what appeals to a lot of people these days.
I haven't. I'm not familiar with that. What are they escaping from?
Well, they have different scenarios. It could be an alien invasion. It could be a mass murderer that goes after them. It's like a Cluedo game or a murder mystery, mystery game in a place. Everybody has a role, and you have to find the killer, in the room. But this is an escape game, so it's very symbolic of what this Matrix is about. It's like everyone wants to set themselves free from the prison. It's just
look what they're putting into people's minds. Look what they're putting into people's minds. You look around and it so these deep state characters, or they're just crawling with these things, you know. And they get us all, you know. That's the deal. They get us all.
That's why the electronic harassments, electromagnetic torture, psychotronic torture, and all this stuff that government agents use, you know, electromagnetic radiation, radar, surveillance techniques to transmit sounds and thoughts into people's head. You know, it affects people's bodies and harasses them all the time. Those are psychotronic weapons. There's a lot of witnesses that go forward and talk about it. I think there was a bioethics commission that was created under Obama's watch that had, I don't know how many dozens of witnesses that complained about that. They didn't do anything about it, but you know,
oh, no,
they reported.
Knowing Obama, he was probably behind it.
Right, exactly. So targeted individuals are they're just being targeted with the V2K, you know, the voice to skull transmission of voice and so forth. It's like synthetic telepathic weapons, and I mean, there's no bioethic laws basically implemented to stop that.
Yeah, they don't want you to know it even exists.
Exactly, precisely.
Yeah.
So, but in a sense, someone mentioned that in the comments on Facebook, you know, when I put out that I was going to interview you, that the justice system acknowledges the physical existence of and guilt for those entities in court, because some murderers are acquitted or in trial for their crimes, or sometimes murders, and they end up in psych hospitals instead of the electric chair or jail life sentences. What do you think?
Well, not over here. They lock them all up. They've closed down all the state hospitals here. All they have now is private hospitals, and those are just a big ripoff. You know, it's a revolving door where they just come in, they put them on meds, they get out there, the voices convince them not to take their meds, they go psychotic again, and then they come back in, and they put them on meds again, and nothing's being cured. You know,
right.
And they're telling these guys, these are hallucinations, you're mentally ill. And there is no other treatment for this other than what we're doing. You know, and heaven forbid if anybody, you know, tries to do it. You know, I volunteered. The last place I worked was a private psych hospital, and they saw that these guys were coming out of my office with their voices gone. And the psychiatrist kept asking me, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I couldn't tell him because it wasn't in his, I mean, it's outside of his box. I mean, it would just freak him out. But they saw I could do this. So I volunteered to come back and teach their major therapist. I said, I'll show him everything I know, and then I'm going to leave and go back into retirement. So I jumped through all the friggin' hoops to come in as a volunteer, which was like going through a job. You had to get blood tests, you had to get fingerprints, you had to get your background checked. I mean, all that crap. And I showed up, and the agreement I had was that I would teach him this, what I knew, and he wanted to learn it because I could talk to him about it, you know, but he knew he couldn't talk to anybody else about it. So he was amenable. So when I finally got cleared, she goes, well, I want you to run groups. And I said, that wasn't the deal. You know, I came here to teach Brent what I know, not to run groups. Well, then I want you to take any patient the psychiatrist refers to you. They're not all amenable to this. There's some that this isn't going to work from. They have to understand some basic things, like the first one is that the voices are not who they are, that these are entities, these are separate entities. And I told her, I said, you know, the voices aren't hallucinations. They're not what you think they are. There is a way to get rid of them. And I'll take you as far down the rabbit hole as you want to go. But it's a totally different approach than what you've been using, and it works. You've seen it for yourself. And so has, you know, the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist got a little spooked, and he says, well, go to, crisis, something management. It was like risk management. So she went to risk management. Risk management said, no, hell no. So that was it. That was it there. But
Yeah, but
Yeah,
you know what I was trying to say is that the culprit goes and says, "I didn't do it. I didn't know what I was doing.
mhm.
Well, either the voices made me do it, or something made me do it," and so he's acquitted. You know, it happens. So it's some kind of acknowledgement or recognition that the voices are entities, and they push.
Yeah, yeah.
They push the criminal to do horrible things.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And a lot of these shooters over here are hearing voices.
Hmm.
And they had thing on the internet where there was these psychotic twin girls. And I think it was in England that they were running in front of traffic and they were being hit by trucks,
Right.
and nothing phased them. I mean, that's one thing about these guys. They get um, incredibly strong when they get enraged. I mean, just I've got some stories that are just supernaturally strong. Um, yeah, I don't know what I'm missing here because I didn't go in order.
That's all right.
What I did do is I asked one of I've got a support group for and not surprised because in the prison they didn't talk to one another. You know, they could sense somebody who had voices or heard voices, but they never approached them. They never spoke to them. And the one time I tried to run a group with a group of schizophrenics, it didn't work out at all. You know, so when I started putting some of this out online, I started getting notes from schizophrenics, and I'm like, you know, maybe we ought to start a support group for these guys. And boy, it's filling up with not only people who hear voices, but other people who are just interested in learning. So I put out a notice to the group, and I said, what is it you would like an interviewer to know? You know, I did this with James True not long ago, but I still have the thing. And I said, what would you want the audience to know? And one of them, I didn't get a big response, but one of them came up and said, the most important point that I would like them to know is that the voices are not hallucinations, but are in fact malevolent, demonic entities that audibly terrorize people and feed off the extreme negativity they cause. Additionally, the rest of the public is also being affected by them, as they can influence us by inserting negative thoughts into our minds and pushing destructive desires, habits, addictions in the effort to destroy our lives. And then they can again feed off all the chaos they produce. They are parasites feeding off the strife they orchestrate from behind the scenes by negatively influencing humanity. Lastly, I have personally found success with, she's talking about Sherry's That's Alive program, and which stopped the intrusive thoughts by strongly rejecting and renouncing them as they are happening, saying that they are not my thoughts and I would never think that way, and ordering them to stop. She says, I hope this helps.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point they made.
She goes on here. Yeah, don't forget your question. She goes on here and she goes, another important thing they might want to know is doors can be opened that allow these voices into our lives by using meth, which I talked about, Ouija boards, and one that I didn't know of before a few months ago is those EVP devices where they listen to ghosts and spirits. Apparently, there's a lot of people being going psychotic from those things. It's almost like when you invite them in, they come.
Right. Yeah, you have to call on them. It's just like invoking incantations for demons. You know, you make him come because you invite him over.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. My question was, have they, the schizophrenics or the people who hear voices, have they described their physical appearance? Have they seen them physically, or maybe in their heads, in their minds, you know, in front of them appear clearly?
Seldom. Some of them have, and when they do draw pictures of them, I do have a book with, I don't know if I can find it. A lot of these are case entry things where they drew pictures and they were awful pictures. But that's rare. Usually it's they see them, they feel them. I've had female patients who were being raped by them. You know, one of the ladies who was working she was a top saleswoman in a furniture store here. she came into the ER saying these things are raping me all the time. I can't work. I have to go to the back room until they stop. She lost her job because of that. And they actually experienced that. I remember one girl where the voices told her they were having sex with her. She goes, "No, you're not. You're not having sex with me." And they said, "Yes, we are. Every time you masturbate, we're having sex with you." And that kind of like, whoa. There was one prisoner who came in and he goes, "There's this female entity raping me all the time. She never talks." She said, he said, "All I can hear is her breathing. I don't know what she looks like. I can just feel she touches me all over. She's constantly raping me." And the first thing that came into my mind was, well, you'd probably be the envy of the prison yard if the other prisoners found out about this, because you got 700 horny prisoners on that yard. And he said, "No, it's not like that. When it's happening all the time, every day, constantly, it's not fun anymore."
Right.
And then there's another. Oh, go ahead. You have a question?
No, go ahead. And we'll go to the listeners' questions afterwards, because there's quite a few of them.
Oh, okay. See, I wanted to bring some of this, with some real cases, so people can experience some of this for themselves. Because once you experience this, words just don't do it. But this is kind of as close as it gets. So what I got is an email from this person. He says, "Sorry, this is pretty weird message. I can't make any sense of this." He said, 1 year ago, I started hearing a voice in my head. He could talk to me, make me feel like he's poking me with needles or cutting me with a knife. Food tasted like shit and water like piss. He could totally control everything I could imagine. So it seemed like black magic. But then things started to get more weird. He told me that he's been harassing me my whole life. I started to realize that I had in my past really weird moments. Like at one point in my life, I had every day a headache that always ended at 12 o'clock. I had itching, which didn't make any sense. I had done many embarrassing things that I hated, and so on. He goes, every device and my friend and family devices had some sort of virus which shouldn't exist. I don't know what he's talking about there. He said, the voice told me that it would be nice if my mom would make some pancakes. In no time, my mom called and asked if I wanted to have some pancakes. Next day, he said to me, he's talking about the voice. He said, the voice said we should get some candy. I needed to take a lady to the pharmacy, so I told him that we are not going to stop. Well, this lady wanted to go into the candy shop, and I indeed did too, and we bought those candies. There were free fidget spinners in a shop, and I put one in my bag. After a day, it was all in pieces. The voice said to me that this guy is going to say such and such, and the guy said such and such. I did some very embarrassing things in front of my mom. Next day, my mother didn't even remember that something like that happened. So I've read a lot about black magic, and many people have had those weird moments where two persons saw the same weird thing. Like there was a couple, and one had problems that modern science would label as mental illness, and the other point out all their flash bulbs shattered at the same time. There was a woman whose stomach was very swollen for no reason, and there were many witnesses. So he was going, I understand you could torture someone. So he was kind of asking me if this was black magic or if I've ever heard anything like that before. And indeed I have. There were prisoners who told me that their voices would tell them where to go get meth when they ran out. And that if they showed up at that place at the time they were told by the voices, somebody would come with the meth. And that was more than once. Same thing with heroin. I had others that would tell me that the voices would tell them which houses to rob, when to go and when to get out, when the police were coming, and when the occupants of the house were up. Probably the most bizarre one was one prisoner who went into a local strip joint, and the voices would tell him which women to pick. And he picked one who, this is weird, who liked to be strangled while they were having sex. And the voices would tell him, you know, that one there, that one there. So he took that one home, and he strangled to the point where she was unconscious. He thought he had killed her. And when she came through, he was all freaked out that he came very close to killing somebody. So there was the one case where I work with now, this guy completely recovered, where his voices told him at the time where he was using a lot of cocaine, where there was a pot field in Oregon. And he was in San Diego, so we're talking hundreds of miles away. So he trusted his voices enough, and they led him step by step, turn by turn, just like a GPS, into Oregon to this base of this mountain. And the dirt road ran out after 23 miles. And he stopped the car and he goes, "What now?" And the voices said, "Get your burlap sacks." That he was told to bring 2 burlap sacks and to go up this hiking trail. And 4 hours later, he came upon this giant sesamolia pot field. And there it was. So he cut down the pot and put it in the burlap sacks. And he asked the voices, "Well, what now?" And they said, "Well, we know where to sell it. We know where this park you can go sell it." So they directed him to that park. And sure enough, he sold all of it. He made hundreds of dollars. And then he went and he bought all the prostitutes he could handle. He bought all the cocaine he could handle. He bought all the alcohol he could handle. And what was strange, it was just really strange, is he said the voices were fishermen. They wanted to go fishing. So he went out on the Columbia River, and the voices would tell him where to cast the hook, how long to leave it there, and when to move on. And he said he was the only guy catching fish on the river that day. So after a couple of weeks of this, he ran out of money again, and he went up to get some more pot. And the voices said, "No, don't go up there. They're waiting for you. If you go up there, they're going to kill you." You know, they said, "Take whatever money you got." And he had a lot more than he came with. And he said, "Go back to San Diego." So I've heard some really strange stories. And this guy told me this after he'd recovered, after we'd gotten rid of the voices, and he was free of them and off of meds.
Wow. You know what it reminds me? It reminds me of the movie with Matt Damon, the Adjustment Bureau, where those sort of like Men in Black guys pulled him out of his life because he met a lady. I guess he was a politician or something, and he was supposed to run for, I don't know what, senator. I don't remember exactly the movie, but the script. But he met, I think it was Anne Hathaway or some other actress, and he fell in love with her. So he screwed off his track. So they kidnapped him. They abducted him to tell him to go, go straight, straighten them out, to go back to where the track that was that what you were assigned to. It's sort of like those voices make me think of the Adjustment Bureau, Men in Black adjusters, I guess.
Well, they do. They run a certain track. It's everything they say is negative and destructive. They want to generate as much negative emotional energy as they possibly can by any lie they can instill into your head. They actually will change the person's perception. They will tell them that, your girlfriend doesn't love you, your husband doesn't love you, they're after you. There was one prisoner who murdered his girlfriend with an AK-47 because the voices told him that she was doing something to him. They are after control. And I have a case here, it's a long case where this is where it ends up, where they have virtually total control over this individual. So I can read that one later. But you were asking about the background of a lot of these people. I have a case here that I dug up that's pretty common as far as the background. And this is like a word-for-word transcript. So this was strange because I can't do this with anything else in my life, but after working with one of these guys, and I would spend hours with them sometime, and the chief psychologist was going, "What are you doing in there? You're doing something you're not supposed to do." I ended up in front of an inquisition, being accused of experimenting with prisoners without departmental permission, basically asking them questions, and virtually almost got fired for that. And this guy just kept on me. So people can't get into these institutions to do this. You can't just walk into a mental hospital and say, "Hey, let me talk to some of your patients, man." No way. That's not going to happen. You can't walk into the prison and say, "Hey, let me interview some of your criminally insane." "Oh, no, we can't do that. You're at risk. You got to go through all these experimental permissions and get all this thing, and it has to be signed off by all these bozos, and it's never going to happen." So I did it under the table. It was like, screw you, I'm going to find out what's going on here, irrespective of all your horse crap that is preventing people from seeing the truth, and then dragging it out from the bowels of the prison and the bowels of the hospital and bringing it out and telling you guys, because you're never going to get in there. And neither is any scientist who wants to study this stuff. They're not going to let you in. It ain't going to happen. Psychiatry is going to go, "Oh, that's horseshit. That's nothing to that. They're crazy. So you ain't going to get it. This is where you're getting it. So you guys listening, this ain't going to be spread by the mainstream media. It's going to have to go through you, through others. This is the only way to get it out there, because the medical mafia and the psychiatric mafia is not going to put this out. They're not even going to look at it. They're going to say it's insanity. And like I said, if I hadn't experienced it myself, I wouldn't believe it.
Right. I think a case, we may have a famous case with Oscar Pistorius. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's that amputated athlete from South Africa who shot his girlfriend on Valentine's Day, I believe. All this, the symbolism behind it is very strong. And he said he thought he was getting harassed by some, I don't know, somebody who was inside his house, but he shot her, and I guess he was released on house arrest, and he went back to jail, and he was finally charged with 13 years and 5 months in jail. But nowhere they talk about voices in his head, but somehow I feel this is the kind of case that's being hidden from the public, that doesn't involve some voices in his head.
Oh yeah, over here they go, "Oh yeah, he was hearing voices," or he was, but they've got everybody convinced that the voices are hallucinations.
Right.
And it's like, okay, so what they do here is they lock up the prisoner and the voices. And then they send them to a prison where they're brutalized and beaten up and intimidated and constant fear, and then they release them onto the public after stirring them up. I mean, the treatment in prisons is garbage. It's not anywhere near community standards. Matter of fact, I watched them cut back on the antipsychotic drugs just to save money. And the chief psychologist I was telling you about, who ordered me not to ask these questions and stopped me from the rubber band and the other stuff. There was one psychotic prisoner that I sent to the medical unit 3 times. Now, he sent one of his stooges there to block psychotics coming in because he didn't want to pay for the medicines, and he wanted to look good to the administration and brag, "Well, we're spending less on medications than anybody else." So this one guy's hearing voices telling him to kill this other inmate. And, they're ramping up. I sent him over there to the medical unit once. The stooge sent him back and says, "Oh, no, he's not psychotic. It's a personality disorder." So I documented all this, sent him back again. They sent him back again saying, "Oh, it's a personality disorder. He's not psychotic." So I documented another 3 pages, and I said, "He's going to kill somebody. You need to do something," and sent him back again. They sent him back again. Said, "You're full of crap. There's nothing, this guy isn't psychotic." He stabbed somebody a week later 13 times.
Wow.
And I was so furious that I didn't go to work for 2 days because I was afraid I would beat the crap out of the chief psychologist. I was afraid I would wring his neck. I was so angry. Yeah. But you were asking about, what is the background? Now, this is kind of typical for a lot of these guys. So this happened on 10/8/2002 at 7:30 in the morning. And it's a prisoner. And he comes into my office, and I said, how long have you been hearing voices now? He said, I've been hearing them since about 7 years old. I said, did anything happen to you then? He goes, yeah, my mother and father would abuse me. They didn't want me. They kept giving me away to each other. My father told me my mother was a whore and screwing other men. My dad was very mean to me. He would do all kinds of bad things. He would make me disappear from myself. He was so mean. So I guess when he was beat so bad, he would just leave, just mentally leave. When I said, well, what do you mean when you said you would disappear? He said, I would just leave my mind while he was beating me. I didn't remember the beatings. I would go back, and then I would be all beat up. What did he beat you with? He would punch me and kick me. He would drink. I said, was he alcoholic? Yes. How often would he beat you? Every day. He would be yelling at me, tell me bad stories about my mom. I think he blamed me for everything going wrong in his life. Did your mom ever try to protect you? No, I don't think so. She would send me back to my father. She never did anything for me. She never made me food or paid any attention to me. She always had bad guys over there. And what do you remember seeing the bad guys doing to your mother? Well, they would fight with her. They would spend all her money. They would beat her. They were always going to the racetrack and leaving me alone at home. I was 6 years old at the time. Even when they were home, they were locked up in the bedroom all the time. My mother ignored me. She wouldn't give me any food. And what did you hear coming from the bedroom? Fighting. They were always fighting. And what happened if you knocked on the bedroom door and asked for food? She would tell me to leave and leave them alone. I would kick the walls. They still didn't pay any attention to me. I ran away thinking that my mom would give me some attention if I ran away or got into trouble, but nothing worked. Did you have any bigger brothers or sisters? Yeah, but my brothers didn't want me around either. They didn't want me to go with them and would send me back home. How old were you when you heard your first voices? 6 or 7 years old. Inside your head or outside? Now, one thing's interesting is that they usually start inside the head, and then when they have enough control, they move outside, and the person hears them outside their head like somebody speaking to them. But they don't do that until they're really entrenched and they have control. They told me I was a bad person and people were going to hurt me. He's talking about his voices there. Did they ever move outside your head? Yes, they were both inside and outside my head. And what kind of stuff did they tell you? They told me I was stupid. I couldn't do anything right, that my parents acted that way because of me, that I messed up their whole life. Do you believe that? Yes. Your parents were messed up before you ever got here. And then he kind of spaces out. What are the voices doing? So when they space out like that, they kind of move inward. I know the voices are talking to him. You can see it. I said, what are the voices saying? They're laughing at me. You believe you have a guardian angel or a God? Yes. Well, then ask your guardian angel. Now this is interesting too, because it worked pretty consistently. So to ask your guardian angel for help right now. Well, they won't let me concentrate. They won't let me think. They're screaming out loud. I can't say no more. I'm afraid. My dad is going to hear me, and his dad's dead. But he says, my dad's going to hear me and make things worse on me. I said, screw him. That's not your dad. And the baby crying in the background is not your baby. Remember, these things have access to all your memories. The memories of your baby crying, as well as everything your dad said to you. I remember, and I was telling him, I remember another guy I worked with where the victims disguised themselves as the guy's abusive father. That's not your baby. The voice is not the voice of your father. They're trying to block you from hearing this information, aren't they? He said, yes, they want me to leave right now. And I want to make it clear to you that you can indeed do so if you want to do that. I want you to know that anytime you're here with me, you're totally free to leave anytime you want. You're not trapped here. You can walk out the door and nothing will happen to you, because a lot of times the prisoners were afraid if they left that they would be in trouble. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I watched one guy, I asked to repeat the 23rd Psalm, and he couldn't do it. He turned red. He started sweating, and the voices were getting real loud. He just couldn't do it. Right. So they have these kind of backgrounds. This is awful. I mean, this is awful. So these entities could smell negative emotion like sharks smell blood, and they go there and they just pour gasoline on the fire. This guy generates all that emotional energy, and they just suck him dry.
Right. They identify the trauma cracks in someone's chakras and aura and etheric, as well as physical body, and just go for it, basically. Let me start with a few questions from our listeners. A friend of mine who's a psychotherapist, whom I've been doing several interviews with, who's very well known from my listeners, David Bouquet, asked this: can a schizophrenic fully recover his mental health and consciousness, some kind of balance, through an inner path into himself, once he or she has tipped over to the schizophrenic side? Can it be undone? Can it be undone? And there's,
yes.
or there's no going back to the norms, to normality standards.
Yes, it can be undone, but it has to be. They have to realize that these things are entities. As long as they think they're hallucinations and they believe what psychiatry is telling them, they have to understand that the voices are not who they are, that they're not their thoughts, they don't belong to them, and that the intent of the voices is not their intention. It's not their intent. That these things are not who they are, and that the kind of things that they tell them are awful things. So yeah, I've had a number of patients, schizophrenics, who fully recovered. There was one, the guy that I was telling you about, who went up to the marijuana fields. He fully recovered, but there was one point where he it's another world. Sometimes they get lonely, and they go back looking for the voices, and the voices do come back. But this guy was intent on getting rid of them. So before he finally fully recovered, he went back and he was looking for them, because for decades he'd heard these voices, and they were part of his life. I mean, they were always there. They were like rotten friends. They were always there, keeping him company, telling him rotten things, but they were always there. So after they disappeared for 2 weeks, and we'd gotten rid of them, he went back looking for them. And I was checking up on him, and he missed one of his appointments. So I went and looked him up, and he just looked awful. He just looked god awful. He looked like somebody thrown him in a washing machine, and he'd been in there all night. Just drained of energy. Just looked like somebody beat the crap out of him. And I said, "What happened? What happened?" He goes, "Well, I went back looking for the voices. I was wondering what happened to him." And he said they came back, and he said, "I asked them, 'Who are you?' And they said, 'We'll show you who we are.' And then they just proceeded to beat the crap out of him." Most of the time, a lot of these guys will ask the voices, "Who are you? What are you?" And the typical response is, "We are you." So they want the patient to think that they are them, that those thoughts belong to them, that they are those thoughts. And that fits right in with the common narrative now, where an overwhelming number of people believe that they are their thoughts. I have an engineer friend. I mean, this guy was a Raytheon engineer. And I asked him, "Do you believe you're your thoughts?" And he goes, "Yeah." And, I worked to stop my thoughts, and he thought that was really weird. And he couldn't comprehend what would happen to him if his thoughts stopped. He thought he would cease to exist if his thoughts stopped.
Bad thoughts, though. Bad thoughts.
Well, all thoughts.
Yeah. All thoughts. Yeah.
All thoughts.
Yeah. Exactly. The next question is from Andrea Sedig, whom I interviewed on the Project Hamlet TV show back a few years ago, and she's had her child taken away by those children mind control ring in Austria, and she's still trying to get her child back, and it's just almost impossible. So Andrea is saying that many whistleblowers, even more MK Ultra ones, are diagnosed with schizophrenia, and because they're getting too close to the truth, and being diagnosed for life is dangerous, she says, because as everyone, for example, could rape him, later claim he or she wanted it, and the same for stealing your things, etc. Courts love this diagnosis, she says, especially unprotective parents who never will be allowed to see their children again. Any solutions from the expert against the abuse of this diagnosis, schizophrenia, as a cover, to stop her from recovering her child?
Well, that's kind of one of the things I saw. Psychology and psychiatry, they're given all this power, to determine what is reality. Yeah, and they don't know shit. It's like, yeah, and that's one of the reasons a lot of these guys, when they hear voices, they don't want to admit it. They don't want to tell anybody that, because once they get that diagnosis, now those diagnoses, every single one of them is made up. There is not a single test anywhere or any kind of device that can verify those diagnoses. And they started out with like 35, when the DSM came out, and now it's up to like 370 something. And every single one of them is made up. This group of psychiatrists get together and they make up this diagnosis, and they go, well, this diagnosis covers this cluster of symptoms. The thing is, you leave them at this long enough and they're going to have a diagnosis for everybody. They had Southern Bell syndrome down there for a while. I don't know if you know what that is. Have you ever seen Gone with the Wind?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was her name? Vivian Lee. That was the Southern Bell syndrome. They made that a diagnosis. Oh yeah, we diagnosed this person. She's got Southern Bell syndrome. Another one was homosexuality. That was a mental illness for a while. Just because these guys say so, they have nothing to back it up. The DSM is a pure work of fiction that they friggin' made up. They don't have any, like for a physical disease, you have all these symptoms. You go, oh, okay, we can test this, we can measure this, and the blood cell count is this, but they don't have anything like that in psychiatry. They could, just by the power invested in them by the friggin' ivory tower, who doesn't know any more than they do.
Well, today the trend is the general trend, from government, is to qualify the critical thinker with conspiracy theorist or fake newssters.
Oh yeah, yeah. They don't want you stepping out of the mainstream line. That's for sure.
Right. So that's the new syndrome. Evelyn is asking if the schizophrenics would, all 100% of them would be under the spell of something, or does it always come after a trauma, a shock, a traumatic shock, a psychological shock? And is there, are they always the same entities that take over or possess the person, the body, or all the whole life of a schizophrenic, or can he or she attract other classes of entities, different ones in their whole life?
Well, what I'm thinking is go back to that previous question about the kids. What I've seen is that the voices hate kids. They hate kids. They have nothing but malice toward kids. So when I saw a schizophrenic mother come into the ER, red lights came on, all over my head. And some of the nastiest battles I've seen were between the voices telling the mother to hurt the child, and the mother's maternal instinct, fighting that. It was like a clash of titans, and the mother didn't always win. So for a kid with a schizophrenic mother is in grave danger.
Right.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this other one with are they the same entities?
Right.
Lots of times they are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're the same. They're the same one. They can recognize the different ones, and they're male and female. You know, some of them are male, some of them are female. And that's one of the questions I would ask them: are they male or female? So, and the females are just as bad as the males in different ways. And usually, they will stay with the person. Sometimes there are others that can come, but pretty much they're the same ones. Sometimes they can recognize their voice, sometimes they can't. There's some patients that have hundreds of them. They hear hundreds of voices screaming at them. And those guys usually have to be sedated because you can imagine hundreds of voices screaming at you all at the same time. They have different levels of intelligence. There was one that would just keep saying to the patient, hey, hey, hey. And he would wonder whether the voice meant hey like what horses eat or hey like hey you know, and that's all it would say, just constantly the same thing. There's others where the voices will say behind them, well, now he's doing this, and now he's lifting the glass, and now he's pressing the keys, and now he's picking up the paper. So like they're talking about what the guy's doing. And then when it gets worse, they start plotting the guy's demise. You know, they can the patient can hear him in there plotting his death, what they're going to do to him, how they're going to hang him, and what they're going to do.
Right. She's also asking, Evelyn is asking, is there an impact on the neurological level, or is it only on the energetic level that things go on? And are bipolar people schizophrenic or multiple personality disorder? Is it similar to schizophrenic or not?
No, it's different. So yeah, you got three questions there, I think. Now, a multiple personality disorder is different from schizophrenia, a lot different. What's interesting about the multiple personality disorder is that these are distinct, different personalities, and they're not always evil and nasty like the schizophrenic voices. The schizophrenic voices are always negative, evil, nasty, rotten, looking to control, looking to destroy, always malicious. The multiple personality voices aren't like that. You know, you have actually different personalities taking over the person at different times. So this particular personality, you know, might be violently allergic to milk. When this one takes over, he can drink all the milk he wants. It doesn't affect him. You know, so they're actually different, very different personalities. It's very rare, you know, but it does happen. Okay, so you're asking about multiple personality. You're asking about bipolar.
Right.
Okay, pure bipolar doesn't necessarily have to have voices. You know, it's a swing. They call it the bipolar. It's negative depression and then a manic high. Now, the voices like the manic highs. You know, so a lot of times they will hear voices, but that's not. You know, that's more an exception than the main. The main is it's a mood swing, and the medications they give for bipolar is like attenuating a stereo. You know, it knocks out the highs, it knocks out the lows. You know, but the bipolars love that manic phase. They feel like Superman. You know, so they don't really want to take the medicine because they like feeling like that. They can, you know, they can go for days and not sleep. They can get all kinds of stuff done. But, you know, they're not, a lot of times they're not hearing the negative voices saying kill yourself or people are after you, or, you know, they just get real manic and then they get real depressed. And then what was the other part of that question?
I think it was on the neurological level versus the energetic level.
No, the schizophrenia it itself does not do neurological damage. Okay, once the voices are gone, the person returns to normal. What does neurological damage is those antipsychotic drugs. You know, and they kill brain cells. They destroy your peripheral nervous system. They cause Parkinson's-like symptoms where the person starts shaking and uncontrollably after they're used for a long period of time due to the neurological damage. They cause the person to get fat. They cause the person to grow breasts. They drug the person down. I mean, there's all these horrible side effects to it. That's what does the damage. Yeah. It's that stuff. And at the state hospital, you can see these guys who have been on that stuff for years. They called it the Thorazine shuffle, where they just shuffle around. I mean, they can't walk normally anymore because there's so much damage to their nervous system. You know, it's those drugs that, so you know, the voices are telling them they're being poisoned, and they actually are being poisoned. It's a slow poisoning of their nervous systems. Their brain cells are dying. Their peripheral nervous system is dying. What is the formal? They have tardive dyskinesia is one form of that. So they have names for it. So what the psychiatrists do is when they start getting those uncontrollable shaking from the damage the drugs is doing to their peripheral nervous system, they give them cogentin to mellow that out so they can continue to destroy their nervous system while they're not feeling any symptoms temporarily until it gets so bad they can't stop shaking. You know? So it's not that the drugs don't have their place. I mean, there's a lot of patients I would never be able to have reached if these drugs weren't around. And the only reason those drugs work is because they calm the person down. They make it very hard for these entities to fill their minds with all this crap and get them anxious and fearful and guilty and paranoid, because they're sitting there going, you know, they're kind of
Right.
drugged out. You know, they, hey man, I'm feeling okay. You know, it's real hard for them to upset the patient and generate that negative emotional energy that they need to feed off of when the guy's drugged up. So
Right.
the first thing they go after is those drugs. You know, they hammer on those drugs, and you know, that perplexed me for years. You know, why are they voluntarily going off their meds? You know, while I was in the state hospital, you know, we were working in a psych rehab center, so we were working with the highest functioning schizophrenics we could find at the hospital. So they not only had to stay on their meds, they had to function when they got out and hold down a job. You know? But they would always sabotage themselves. You know, they would, I don't know how many times I was called over to one of the vocational classes because one of the patients who was schizophrenic stopped taking their meds and they were going ballistic in the classroom.
Yeah.
And that was so common. You know, it was like you could almost predict that at some point they were going to stop taking their meds. So after 3 times stop taking their meds, we went, you know, you're not going to make it if you can't stay on your meds, because that's the only thing we knew at that time. You know, they had to stay on the meds if they were going to stay sane. Why were they choosing to go insane? You know, the side effects are bad. I mean, you can list all the side effects. They're bad. You know, but when you look at all the symptoms of florid psychosis, it's like hell on earth. It's like a bad case of the flu compared to the bubonic plague. You know? So I would ask them, why did you go off your meds? You know? Now, the ones who'd only, they just started on the meds, they were thinking, oh, well, it's like taking an antibiotic. I'll take these medications, the voices will subside and get less, and I'm cured. No, no, it doesn't work that way. Every other medicine works that way, but not these, you know. So the medical model doesn't work with schizophrenics. You know, it's not the same. The rules are different. So then they'd find out, okay, I have to stay on the meds because if I don't, I start hearing the voices and I get crazy and I get in trouble. But they go off them anyway. So I would always ask them, why did you go off your meds? Why'd you go? I don't know. So I'm like, well, wait a second. You know, maybe they don't understand the question. So what I started doing was everyone that went off their meds and went psychotic and they had to put them back on again, I would give them a sheet of paper and said, write down all the negative side effects you felt from your meds. I didn't tell them what they were or all the ones that were possible, because the only ones that were relevant were the ones that they experienced. So I'd get that, and they'd write down, okay, I experienced these side effects. They weren't good. And then I had 2 sheets of paper with all the symptoms of psychosis, the schizophrenia on there. The voices, the nightmares, the bad things, the not sleeping at night. I mean, all like 2 pages worth. And I'd say, give them that, and I'd say, check off each one of these that you've experienced when you were off your meds. Bam, 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 bam. Here's this whole bunch of them. And I look at it. I give it to them. I said, which one is worst? No doubt. I mean, they'd look at it and I go, well, yeah, the psychotic symptoms are worse. The schizophrenia is worse. And then I'd go, well, why do you keep going off your medicines then? You know what they'd say? I don't know. I don't know. They didn't know.
Because they're better prey that way for those entities that feed off of them.
Well,
I have a question from Ivy in Australia. She's asking about a recent study. Have you heard of toxoplasmosis? There's a study that talks about that has found that cases of schizophrenia rose sharply around the turn of the 20th century, when domestic cat ownership became common, and they talk about toxoplasmosis, which is something that comes from cats, I guess.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that. I mean, schizophrenia has been around since the times of the Egyptians. I mean, they have it documented all the way back then. I mean, the Greeks, it's been around for thousands of years.
Right.
Back in the medieval times, they were a lot more aware of what was going on than we are today. I mean, 300 years, what was it? Science has only been around for 200 years. And here you got these psychiatrists going, hey, these are hallucinations, man. There's no such things as evil spirits. And they haven't done a single solitary study on the voices at all. Just out of raw arrogance, they go through medical school, who doesn't know anything about these things either. And they go, we declare that these are hallucinations because we said so. And they haven't done nothing, not one single study, not one. Well, what medical doctor would want to do a study on hallucinations? You'd look foolish,
Right.
And the one professor who did do something, it was Dr. Irmak in Turkey. He watched a shaman repeatedly cure schizophrenic patients, cure them. I mean, no medicines, the voices disappear. And he wrote a journal article and published it in a kind of a medical journal kind of place, and said, okay, I've witnessed this. These people are cured. They don't have voices. We might want to look at this. And man, they attacked him up, down, sideways, all around. I mean, all these, how dare you? You're bringing us back into the dark ages. How could you even suggest such a thing? I mean, they just blasted him. They blasted the journal. You should see some of the comments. I got some of the letters that, and I responded to some of those letters. One of them was from some philosophy professor in Oxford. Man, I tore her a new butthole, and waited for her to come back at me. I mean, it was clear she had no experience whatsoever with schizophrenics or had ever even been inside a mental hospital. And here she is blasting this guy like she knew something. It just infuriated me.
Yeah, you've probably heard of that French shaman lady called Corinne Sombrin in France. She worked with neurologists, and she works with shamanic trance for therapy. So that's a question by Jan, actually, whom I interviewed about his ayahuasca experiences in Peru. He's asking your opinion on the usage of DMT in some therapies, synthetic or with the ayahuasca plants and so forth, to heal schizophrenia. Is it something psychonauts have access to, or is it efficient?
I've talked to some people who've used it. I know somebody who's used it. They were a drug addict. They said they had some amazing spiritual experiences while they were under its influence. They threw up. They remember talking to some positive spiritual beings. And after that, the craving for the heroin stopped for about 2 weeks, absolutely stopped. The people who have used it said it has changed their lives. It actually opens them up to another dimension. I know they have these frogs that jump around here that they call them Colorado river toads, and they have these big welts on their side of their head. The prisoners used to lick that and get a psychedelic experience from that. I've heard people talk about LSD, and I've heard people talk about ayahuasca. It seems like the ones who've taken the ayahuasca have had a much more spiritual experience, and said they have learned things from it. They were doing that in Mexico for a while. They had a treatment center with ayahuasca. Of course, the mainstream doesn't want people changing they don't want you to understand that we're spiritual beings. They don't want you to know your true nature. They want you to think you're just another human being, another slave. Go to work, make your money, pay your taxes, and don't cause trouble. We're spiritual beings, and people, shamans have known for tens of thousands of years that the spirit gets sick before the body follows suit. And
right. I have another question about from Rosie from Quebec about Alzheimer's syndrome. Is it similar to schizophrenia in a way? Because she's asking, she's talking about her experience with her mom that was hallucinating with Alzheimer or Alzheimer disease.
Well, I worked with that population for a while as a psychiatric evaluator. One thing I saw that was right on with that is something called sundowners syndrome. Okay, after the sun goes down, these guys started getting irritated and ramped up. Now the same thing happens with schizophrenics. The voices get louder and more persistent at night. Once the sun goes down, the voices kick up. And they hit strongest between 3 and 4 in the morning, and they wake the person up, and they cause nightmares. So they don't want the person to have any respite. They just want to beat on him until he just kind of gives up and goes, all right, whatever you want. And then they take control. So they're after the control. The Alzheimer's is that's a one-to-one correspondence between that. Now, as far as hearing voices, the ones I spoke to didn't. They just acted out. They never told me about voices they were hearing. They just became difficult to manage, and they got belligerent and hostile. But none of them ever said anything about voices.
Okay.
But I found that interesting that both of these, whatever they are, schizophrenia and Sunday, when the sun went down, they got worse, much worse.
Right. But the voices are heard day and night, right? Or more at night?
More at night.
More at night.
Right. More at night. And sometimes, in a lot of cases, what they'll do is attack, and when the person is completely drained, they'll go away for a while. But yeah, they don't let up. It gets worse at night. A lot of times when you're talking to a schizophrenic, he looks like spaced out. It's like he's not paying attention. He's got another dialogue going on in his head while he's trying to listen to you. So here you're trying to talk to him, and here's the voices kind of going, get away from this guy, or he's a jerk, or he's a blah, 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 and they're trying to ferret out these two conversations, which it gets them, and that they look real confused about it. They don't know how to shut them up.
Right. Another question from Ivy and Cyril in Australia as well. The role of bacteria and parasites in schizophrenia. Worms and bacteria incite us according to her research regarding mitochondria and the microcosmic world, runs our emotions and health. I sent you an article about this crab, this bacteria, that this parasite that turned Alaska king crabs into zombies. Has there been any studies from your end, or have you considered looking into parasites, bacteria, and things of that nature?
None that I know of. What I would do is what worked. If standing on your head and doing the jig worked, I would use it. Anything that affected the voices, anything that had any impact on them, I would adopt it and use it. And I would keep doing this until they started to recover. Now, once they started to fully recover, things got really, really weird. I mean, really, really weird. It was like, once I realized that these things were separate entities, it was like, I opened the door and went into this world that I had no cognitive map for. I had no, I didn't know where it went or what was happening or what was upstairs or what was in the kitchen or I was just kind of floundering around, and all these strange things started happening. But they started getting much worse when inmates started fully recovering. I mean, I remember one where we finally got rid of the voices. The prisoner said they screamed as they left. And then he said the silence is deafening, because he'd been hearing them for decades. That night at about 3 a.m, I was being crushed down into my bed. I woke up and something was crushing me into my bed. And that happened every single time a schizophrenic recovered out of the prison. So whatever these things were, they knew where I lived and they followed me home. And it was just like something was crushing me into the bed. It was terrifying. Who could you talk to about this stuff? It's like,
Right.
Oh yeah. Talk to your wife. Yeah, something was crushing me in the bed. Yeah, you're a wacko, man. Yeah.
Abdel is asking if you can explain if there's a difference or similarities between psychopaths and schizophrenic.
Well, there's like a continuum of thought. I mean, all of us have experienced psychotic kind of things. Like you're walking down the sidewalk and all of a sudden this thought pops into your head that's just absolutely terrible. It's like something you would never do, something you would never consider, something you would never act upon. And you're just shocked that how could I have such a thought? How could I even, and people think, well, it appeared in my head, so it must be my thought. So that generates all this repercussion stuff. Like, what are you thinking? How could you think that? I remember one time I was out here in Arizona. We don't, for the most part, cut grass. We go out with a machete and chop the cactus down, like keep them from taking over everything. So I was out in the back with a machete, and I was cutting some of the cactus, and here comes my dog, who's a white husky, beautiful dog. And here's this thought that comes into my head: chop her head off. And I'm like, what? Like what? And it's like, how could you think that? I knew where that came from. That wasn't mine. So it's a continuum of things from those of us who have control or somewhat control over our thoughts, and not a lot of people have a lot of control over their thoughts, to the neurotics and the psychopaths who are also having thoughts inserted into their head to act on things. They're not normal so psychopaths a lot of the time can function in society and keep that covered up, and get away with this crap that they're doing, like Hillary Clinton and her ilk, and schizophrenics who become non-functional. You know, a lot of times it gets so bad they can't function. But a lot of the ones in my group are functioning. They're holding jobs. They're still hearing the voices. They're still fighting the voices. They're still using tactics to beat them down. A lot of them aren't on medications. Some of them are. But yeah, you have to look at the big question is, where do thoughts come from? And when I was in the PhD program, I was thinking, you know, after I left the state hospital and went into that doctoral psychology program, thinking, well, they know the answer to this, but they're not giving it to master's level people. They're keeping it to themselves. Yeah. So after years in that program, I was like, man, I hate this. They were trying to program my brain to think like they do, you know, to follow it was like boot camp. You know, for you think like we do, you act like we do, you do what we say, and it's like this is just the opposite of, you know, I'm like, what, you know, what? Yeah, and they didn't like you asking too many questions either. So finally, here was the head of the psychology department giving a lecture on how to cheat with statistics and get away with it. You know, and you know, I raised my hand and I said, well, wait a second, you're treating the end of this population, this very end 5%, as if it's an entire population in itself. And it's not, it belongs to this other. How can you do this? You know what his response was? Well, if they're not sharp enough to catch it, that's their problem. And I'm like, what? What? And all Tom and I looked at each other, this other student, we're just like, you know, we couldn't believe it. And then we looked away so he didn't see us looking at each other like we were, you know. But later on, that same guy, he was given another lecture and he said, is there anybody who has any questions over anything? And I raised my hand and I said, yeah, where do thoughts come from? And he just looked at me like, where'd you come from? The Mars? You just drop out of a spaceship somewhere? You know, if you, I mean, thoughts drive it. Thoughts drive everything. If you don't know where they come from and how they behave and what to do about them, you got nothing. You know, you got nothing if you can't. You know, now Emanuel Swedenborg, who lived 700 years ago, a Christian mystic, he knew exactly where they came from, and he wrote about it. And he wrote about evil spirits. And Wilson Van Dusen, a clinical psychologist who was working in California while I was working in the prison, had written a book called The Presence of Other Worlds. And he had one chapter where he highlighted the findings of Swedenborg and how that related on a one-to-one basis with what he was finding with his schizophrenic patients. You know, there was one chapter he wrote about that, and I saw that, and I went, I got to find this guy. So I was searching for him, and finally, one of the Swedenborgian ministers here knew him and introduced me, and we worked together for a year before he died of cancer. The Swedenborg knew what these things were, and he said these things put thoughts into your mind. He was saying that 700 years ago. And he held conversations with them. And those conversations were exactly like the conversations I held with the schizophrenics and their voices. Now, Van Dusen talked to the voices a lot more than I did. I knew they were enemies. I knew they were rotten. I knew they were trying to kill my patients. So I didn't see them as friends at all. I saw them as mortal enemies. Van Dusen was trying to make friends with them, you know, so he could learn about them. And he would carry on conversations with them, you know, and he found that they didn't know, for the most part, anything more than the patient did, you know, which some of these cases that I've heard, they knew a lot more than the patient did. They knew stuff the patient couldn't possibly have known. But he said they have a malicious urge to destroy.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what Swedenborg said, and that's what I've found also. But they were afraid of him because they were afraid he was going to try to destroy them. You know, so his chapter is really interesting when he tried to befriend them, and after a while he came to the conclusion that he had nothing else to learn from them. Mm-hmm. because they weren't going to tell him anything. You know,
Right.
you had to go after them. You had to try to destroy them before their true nature came out, and what possibilities they had and how powerful they were. Toward the end of the time I was working, I could feel them. I mean, I could feel how strong they were, and I don't know where that came from. It was just one day I got to where I could feel them. It was this icky, cold, electrical feeling, and I could feel how strong they were. I could feel when they were present. So, you know, I'd ask schizophrenic patient, do you hear the voices right now? And they go, no. And I said, yeah, you are. And this is how strong they are. And they go, how'd you know that? You know, and they go, did you used to have these? You know, it's like, but yeah, there were some that were so strong, I thought they were going to break through whatever defensive field I had around me. And I always wondered what would happen if they did. I mean, there were some that were so strong, it was like scary.
Well, Tracy Twyman tried to have a conversation through a Ouija board with entities and Baphomet and so forth. And well, she just passed recently, Tracy Twyman. So we don't really know what happened to her, but I don't think those entities weren't any good, and they were dangerous, as she admitted.
Those Ouija boards are very, very dangerous. People think they're toys. I don't know. You know, I would say amphetamine is number one as far as being possessed. Ouija boards are number two. I don't know how many patients I've run into who were playing with Ouija boards when their voices started and then just didn't stop. You know, it's like you're asking them to come. You know, once you invite them in, it's like you've invited them. They're there.
Exactly. It's just like a vampire. You open the door for him to come in, and same thing when invoking demons. So there's another question from Marie Claire, who says, if they are interacting with entities like psychics, are they comfortable? Are they basically at the same level as some psychics who feel and see entities?
Well, there are all kinds of entities around all the time. I mean, they're surrounding us right now. I mean, this was the least amount of trouble I've had with an interview in a while. They usually mess with my computer. They make the sound go out. They make the earphones stop. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Freeman can tell you, or Steve Mercer can tell you all the trouble we had with the electronics, you know, when I was talking to him.
I guess I have a better protection on my end.
Well, we've been extremely lucky, except for that one little thing, and maybe the rough start we had there. But this has been, you know, we've had less interference here. Now, what was your question? I got off
about psychics.
Oh, psychics. Yeah, there's, you know, I've watched some of these guys. They'd come on and they would pull up dead grandmothers and dead grandfathers and information. Okay, your grandfather wants you to know this, and you're going. They're out there. You know, they're right beyond this vibrational level. You know, there's all kinds of entities surrounding us all the time. You know, they're just a step away. This is the final thing. This is like the ground floor, and it just keeps going from there. You know, and we're affected by them to different degrees. Also, the one guy who recovered, this was the same guy who did the marijuana fields. He would tell me that his mother would come and visit him and talk to him, and she was deceased. And when I heard that, I was real suspicious, because they can take on any, you know, since they have complete access to your memory, they can pull up your memories of any abusive person in your life and pretend that they're them, because they would have access to that information that nobody else would, you know. And they'd bring that up, and there were 2 or 3 times where they were pretending to be a deceased abuser, you know. So they'd come back, and I remember one girl was saying, I was at this guy's funeral, and the guy was extremely abusive, very nasty, and she was so glad he was dead. And then she started hearing the voices say, no, I'm not dead, I'm back. You remember the time, da-da-da-da, you remember this? I mean, they can pull that stuff out of the memory. So Carlos Castaneda at one point says, they give us their minds. You know, so they go in there and they can they can go into your mind. They can pull up all those memories, and they can bring them out, and they can rub them in your face. Everything rotten you've ever done, they can bring up and rub in your face. You know, sometimes when you did something wrong and you're embarrassed about it, it just keeps coming up over and over and over and over again. You know, that doesn't happen to any other animal on the planet. You know, and you have to have language for that to happen.
It's a shaming game. You know, name and shame, basically, and they want to make you feel guilty so they can exploit. And
that's right.
You know,
They will use anything possible to generate that negative emotional energy. You know, and there's some where Sherry was telling me once where they were on her, and when she was already recovered, she knew what they were, and they'd come back and they go, "Hey, you're this and you're that," and they go, "Yeah," he should go, "Get out of here, you know, get lost, you bunch of fools." "Whoa, that doesn't upset you." "Well, try this." You know, so if something doesn't work, they'll try something else, and they'll keep throwing garbage at you until you bite. They're like fishermen. You know, "Oh, well, let's try this. Let's see if we can get them upset with this. And if that doesn't work, let's try this." And they'll cast another one, you know. But the bottom line is they want to generate that negative emotional energy because that's their food.
That reminds me of your fisherman voices that you described with that guy that went fishing, you know. It's actually, we feel like we're in a fishbowl here, and those entities are just fishing us up, you know.
Well,
the ones who are,
they are. They are. And that's where it's critical that we understand that we are not our thoughts. You know, that thought stream is a program that started when you were first born. You know, your parents program you to believe this and that and who you are and what you are. And then you went to school and the ivory tower programmed you to believe this and believe that, and the experiences you've had throughout your life. So it's your story repeating itself over and over and over again. And that was one of the big things that when I was at the state hospital, Carlos Castaneda said, and that, now I didn't trust him any more than I did anybody else. So I went, okay, he said that if you experience something that is so far out of your normal reality, you will blot it out or ignore it or wipe it out. You know, you will not assimilate it because it's too invasive, it's too disturbing. You know, and I've seen that with other people. When you talk about this strange stuff, I mean, a lot of people go, "I can't deal with this. I mean, this isn't the way it is. This couldn't be. I mean, these things couldn't exist. You know, they just can't deal with it." So I did an experiment once where I created a situation where I could sit back and watch these people's reaction to something that I had somebody stage that was so bizarre that it couldn't have happened. You know, it was just so bizarre. And then watch what they did with it. And I watched that incident mutate from, and the first step was a mutation away from what they actually saw. And then later it mutated into something else because this one didn't make sense. So they came up with this one. And these were two people, you know, and that didn't make sense. So they came up with this one. And then a few weeks later, they'd wiped it out. They'd forgotten it. And I went, okay, that verifies it. Every time I see something strange happen, I have to write it down because if I didn't, I would forget it because it just didn't fit. You know, it didn't fit. And I'm seeing all these things that didn't fit, you know, piece by piece by piece. It was like a giant jigsaw puzzle. You know, why are the voices don't like church? Why don't they like preachers? Why do they react this way to the 23rd Psalm? Why are these people going off their medications? Why are the voices always negative? You know, it's all this cluster of pieces that this mosaic that didn't come together for 35 years. You know, finally it fell into place, you know, and it's like, oh, wow, this is what's going on, you know, but each one of those pieces made no logical sense.
Right. Have you had any description of any ET-like forms or beings or shapes or messages or voices that could be extraterrestrial from your patients?
Not from my patients. Not that I recognized. I've heard of that from other therapists. I've heard of that. Matter of fact, there's a very interesting book called The Law of One I don't know if you've heard
Yeah.
of that. That came from ETs, and that's a very interesting book. And you read through that, and it makes a lot of friggin' sense.
Mm,
You know,
mm,
and they were coming through this medium.
mm, mm.
You know, so you never know who you're talking to on the other side, and I would use feeling and intuition a lot. You know, how far can I push this guy before he goes off? And the way I was raised, I came from a very tumultuous family, with a lot of craziness in there. So it was like the best training I could have ever had for going into a insane asylum. And it's like these crazy guys would come at me, and I'd go kind of, well, okay, what else you got? And I'd been raised with it, so it's almost like this is what I'm supposed to do, and your audience has to get this stuff out, because there's no other way it's going to get out. This is
Right.
going to be suppressed. Psychiatrists are going to say this guy's a flaming lunatic, but they had 35 years to lock me up and diagnose me as a lunatic, and they missed their chance. So so I'm telling the truth, and this is what's actually going on behind the scenes that these guys don't want out. It's a threat to the pharmaceutical industry. It's a threat to psychiatry, and all they're doing is poisoning people with these pills. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of patients I couldn't have reached without those medications, because the voices have to be suppressed before you can even reach them, before you can even talk to them. And there were some that were so far gone that they're never going to be reached. I could only touch base with them for maybe 30 seconds. I could talk to the person who was left there. Who was left. And I do have a case of one who was like that. I can read that if you don't have any more questions.
Yeah, I have a couple questions, but we can, go ahead. You can read.
No, go ahead.
Well, there's a lady, a princess. She's asking if you have been in touch with French psychotherapists who are interested in your work and sharing it.
No, I studied for French all through high school. I studied all through college. There's nobody here to speak French to, and I've forgotten it all.
Right.
But no.
But on this side here, is there any French psychotherapist who's approached you with? No.
No, but I'd be certainly glad to speak to them. Don't believe what I say. Therapists who are working in this area, look and see for yourself. Look and see the voices are negative. Ask your patients, where's your energy go? What are the voices telling you? When do they come? I mean, all the things I've mentioned in here are completely verifiable. Don't listen to me. Go look for yourself. I've pointed out what to look for. Go look and you'll see it yourself. You'll see it for yourself. You'll experience it for yourself, because just listening to me talk is not the same as actually seeing it and experiencing it. Once you experience it, you know it's real. There's nobody going to talk you out of it. There's nobody who can come up to me and go, yeah, you're crazy. You didn't see this. You didn't experience this. Because I did. I did. And I denied it for years. I denied it well past the point I should have. I just couldn't deal with it. I didn't want to believe it until my denial system just completely crumbled, because I kept looking. I wanted to know what's causing this, what's happening to these people, what are the voices, what's driving this disease, and this is what it is. It's the voices that drive this disease. It's not a chemical imbalance. They're not going to find it in the genes. They're not going to cure it with medicines. This is another level of reality. This is another vibrational field. It's there. It's affecting everybody, not just schizophrenics. It's most easily seen with schizophrenics because it's the most blatant, it's the most noticeable, but everybody's being hit.
Right. And I mean, Luckman is asking if you know of any studies on mind waves and the possibility to interfere with those waves that would prove the existence of a takeover, an external takeover of those mind waves. Is there a study like this?
The only thing I've seen anywhere near similar to that is the 30 Years Among the Dead, where who was a Baldwin used static electricity to drive those entities out. They didn't like it. Now, there is something called the Tesla violet ray that also produces static electricity. You can buy one of these devices on Amazon for about $100. I've put that out to my schizophrenic group to see if any of them wanted to experiment with that, and I haven't got any feedback. But that puts out static electricity too, and I'd be very interested to see what that does as far as the voices, what reaction the voices have to that. Now the other one was the rubber band thing, where they snapped the rubber band. So I suspect they wouldn't like that the violet ray very much at all.
Right.
But I don't know. I can't say. I can tell you that it did shut them up with the rubber band. Snapping the rubber band would shut them up for 30 seconds or a minute or two. But then they'd come back.
Right. Well, there's discussing something to work from it. That's to make it last a little longer than 30 seconds. Do you think there are schizophrenics who are locked up in clinics and hospitals that are not schizophrenics?
Yeah, I think there's some. It's easy for a psychiatrist to go, yeah, he's psychotic. And all the judges going, well, you're the expert. They don't know crap. They don't know crap. They can recognize it. They can see it. They have no idea what causes it. They can see the cluster. They know they can't cure it. They have no studies on the voices. They believe firmly that they're hallucinations, and anybody who tries to tell them anything otherwise is immediately banished to, the bathroom or whatever. I mean, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to listen. It's like, well, we got the medical degree. We know what we're doing. Yeah, the one most dangerous thing is the thing that happened to me when the walls started crackling. If a therapist goes to tell a schizophrenic patient that these things are parasites, you can expect an explosion. That's when they're in the most trouble. If they try to do that, they better know what they're doing. And I never went into the prison or the ER without praying for protection ever. And the times I forgot, I paid for it.
Yeah, but if they're dangerous criminals, I mean, that's, you're risking your life.
Well, it's not just criminals. The ones in the ER is the same thing.
Yeah.
You tried to tell them that their voices are parasites. And I had to be very careful with who I chose to give information to in the ER, because they were constantly pushing to just get these guys out of there, just move them through, either put them in the hospital or get them out, get them out of the ER. So they weren't into helping anybody. They were just into drugging them and locking them up in the mental hospital, drugging them until they regained their senses, letting them go. And then it was a big revolving wheel that just went over and over. And you'd see the same people, week after week, month after month, until either they killed themselves or disappeared some other way. I mean, it's just, and they're scalping the taxpayer. They're killing the taxpayer. Oh, yeah. They go, oh, medical costs are out of control. No doubt. Yeah, go figure.
Yeah, psychotropes and psychodrugs are just rampant here in the U.S. as well. So I think we're the two biggest consumer countries in the world.
Yeah, I had some statistics here somewhere on how many kids they had. I don't know if yeah, like here's just some of the side effects of these drugs. 40 warnings of cardiovascular disorders, 25 warnings of increased risk of death, 22 warnings of heart problems, 11 warnings of these are things that actually were experienced. All right, and this came from 113 warnings from 9 countries: Australia, Canada, Denmark, Ireland, Japan, New Zealand, South Africa, United Kingdom, United States. 11 warnings of allergic reactions, gastrointestinal problems, blood disorders, skin conditions, and it goes on. Look at this. I mean, this is a whole page of damage that these things do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they get addicted. So when you get off,
well, no, they're not addictive. Nobody in their right mind would want to take these things. So that's crazy too, because here in the U.S. it costs like $800 for a month of this crap to stay sane. You
Right.
can drive across the border into Mexico, and in order to get them, you have to go to a psychiatrist. So they got that tied up. So here you're spending money for an expensive psychiatric appointment. That guy goes, "Oh yeah, you're psychotic. You need these meds." So here's $100-something for that appointment, and then you have to go through the pharmacy, and the pharmacy charges you 10 times more than you can get them across the border for the same drug.
Well, yeah.
You can go across the border in Mexico, get them over the counter without a prescription for a small fraction of what you pay in the U.S. It's a scam. It's one of the biggest scams I've ever seen in the universe.
Yeah, it sure
And
is.
they're holding them to it.
Yeah, but it's basically a takeover of the minds when you
It
think
is.
of it.
It is. Now, what's interesting? You talk about the suicide rate of schizophrenics,
Mm-hmm.
And then the suicide rate of psychiatrists.
Oh, wow.
It's virtually exactly the same.
Wow.
Let me see if I can find that. It's
I don't know about that in France. I don't have any statistics.
They put them out here.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can. Oh yeah, here's the one, the poked out one, where the voices were telling this guy if he poked his eye out, they would go away. He poked his eye out and they got worse. They said, "You stupid bastard! That's what you get for listening to us."
Wow.
Journal of Clinical Psychiatry, 1980, August 4th.
Right.
Well, okay. Here's the whole article. It says that the annual rate of non-fatal violent crime for all occupations between 1993 and 1999 was 12.6 per 1,000 workers. For physicians, the rate was 16.2. For psychiatrists, the rate was 68.2.
Wow. Yeah. That's
right.
huge.
So this is the attack rate upon them.
Right.
So it's what, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. It's almost 6 times higher than for any other worker.
Wow. Well, I don't have the stats about psychiatrists here, but I have the stats for suicide rate in France. It's like they say 8,000 suicides each year. In France, 2 million people are suffering from a mental disorder, bipolar, schizophrenia, or depression.
Well, in here it's closer to 47,000 suicides a year.
Right.
That's sick. And it's these voices. I mean, what is it that tells you to kill yourself? Where does those thoughts come from? It's these things that I'm talking about. Somebody mentally healthy does not. Now, this was the one on the tax for psychiatrists. So it's much higher, but their suicide rate is virtually identical to that of the schizophrenic, and that that's documented by the National Mental Health Organization here. Here it is, suicide rate of psychiatry. According to the Journal of the American Medical Association, the suicide rate for psychiatrists is 65 per 100,000, or 5.9 times higher than that of the general population, right?
Wow.
Or roughly equivalent to that of their schizophrenic patients. So the suicide rate, you wonder about the correlation between those two things. The suicide rate for psychiatrists is much higher than that for regular doctors.
There's almost a contagious syndrome there. Have other psychiatrists told you that they heard voices themselves?
No psychiatrist would ever admit that.
Right.
Never.
Yeah.
Never. Forget it. You try to tell them that these things are hallucinations and they get crazy, or not hallucinations, they get crazy. And I'd be, if I did the broadcast I just did with you while I was working, I'd be fired.
Yeah, for sure.
They'd go, "This guy's a wacko. We can't let him in here."
So you're out of the psych system now, or?
Oh, I couldn't talk like this if I was if I was still there.
Right.
I couldn't. They would have me up in front of the medical officer in no time, and I'd be up there. They shut your mouth, or you want to keep this job. It's
Right.
like,
Right.
I've had too many run-ins with psychiatrists in my life. I'd know what would happen.
Yeah, I guess same thing goes with the movie industry, or the showbiz. I mean, if they come out and talk about the rituals and so forth, and the horrific stuff they do, things they do to children,
Yeah,
and
and
satanic rituals.
that's these same entities that are
Right,
driving.
exactly.
They go, oh yeah, well,
Mm.
they have to at some point ask where thoughts come from.
Right.
And they don't come from this dimension. You can't find a thought in a person's head. You can't open up the brain and cut it up and look for a thought. They're not there. They're just not there. And I'm sure you experience this too, is when you think about your mother or something, and then all of a sudden the phone rings. Stuff like that. I mean, that you sense something is wrong at home, or you sense something is wrong with a loved one. I mean, we're all connected.
Yeah.
We're all connected. And they did get me 2 weeks before the interview with Freeman Fly.
Right.
I was in Mexico, and all of a sudden, I went to bed normal one night. Next morning, I got up and I could not move my arm. It was murder. It was so painful. I came home and they said it was a staph infection that had taken over my shoulder. Now, I didn't injure it. I didn't do anything to it.
Right.
But it certainly did knock me out of that interview, because I was on antibiotics. I was in the hospital. I was having to do, IV antibiotics. I mean, it knocked me out for 3 solid months. And thank heavens that Freeman waited, because that was our first interview. It's in Freeman. I got knocked out, And then when we finally did connect, Steve, who is Freeman's guy behind the scenes, I mean, the electronics went nuts.
Whoa.
They went nuts. I mean, there was all kinds of electronic problems that we had before it finally straightened out. And Steve's going, what is going on here?
Yeah, that's why I think there's something to it. The microscopic world, like the worms, the parasites, the bacteria inside our body are somewhat controlling everything, our emotions.
Well,
maybe those entities are controlling the worms.
Well, I think in this case they did, because I talked to the surgeon. I said, how common is this? Where, usually when you get an infection, it starts slow and you can feel it, and it gets red and it starts hurting and it goes for a long time and it just keeps getting. This wasn't like that. It was like bam, just overnight, and here's this full blown. I mean, that just doesn't happen. They said it was very rare. I have no doubt at all that they knocked me out of that interview.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Well, do you have any dreams of your mom? She'll come through dreams.
Right. Yeah, I have a couple times, but she didn't talk to me.
No, mine didn't either when she came. She just was there.
Right.
Yeah.
So oh yeah, yours. Yeah. When
yeah, mine and my brother had the same thing. He had to dream with my mom too. She didn't talk. She just appeared.
Right.
She was just there, standing there, and it was like I was going like, "Mom, I thought you were gone," and then boom, she's gone.
Right. Yeah, strange. Well, I guess I don't know if you followed some of Wayne Bush's research on his website called trickbythelight.com. I've interviewed him a few times. It's pretty interesting about NDEs, about the afterlife, and what those entities are making themselves look like in this holographic tunnel of light, which is another fake way to attract the butterflies that we are, to the light, and they make relatives appear. They make like spiritual figures or gods or religious figures appear. But it's all a hologram.
Here in any form they want to.
Right.
Matter of fact, there was a devil worshiper in the prison that this guy weirded me out. but I was curious. What makes this guy tick? And he had this strange affect. It was like that movie where they had the puppet. The horror movie with the puppet.
Right. Chucky.
Yeah. His affect was like that. It was that strange affect, and he was schizophrenic, but he didn't have the lack of energy like the others, and that perplexed me. I'm like, why do you have so much energy, and these guys don't? And I pulled him in, and I asked him, and he said they give it to me, and I said, what do they give it to you for? Well, they give it to me to do certain tasks.
Wow.
And I didn't want to ask him what those tasks were, but he said he could astrally travel to certain cells in another prison almost 100 miles away, and he could see what was going on in those cells with those people he had contact with.
Wow.
And I asked him, I said, have you ever seen the devil? And he goes, yeah, I've seen him. I said, well, what do he look like? He said he was absolutely beautiful. And that took me back. I wasn't expecting that. He said he was absolutely beautiful. And who else said something like that? It was Jason Quitt said that an entity was whispering in his ear at night that he was going to get cancer. And he said he went out of his body and he looked, and he said it was just an absolutely beautiful being that looked like it might be an angel.
Right.
So they can appear to take any shape.
That's what I get with all those channelers and ET contactees and abductees who talk about Ashtar and all those figures, those entities that come from the astral realms, basically.
Well, they got to be careful because they don't know what they're inviting in. Right.
And most of them are being deceived or are under the Stockholm syndrome. They just love their entities, just follow their instructions, and they're so beautiful and just so great, and they're our saviors, and it's just crazy.
Yeah, you got to be careful. You got to be careful. But the one I was telling you where the mother came, his mother would come and she would drive off the weaker voices, but when the stronger ones came, she would take off. And I was suspicious of her, but, and I kept asking him, did she ever tell you anything negative? Did she ever say anything bad? And he said, no. And I said, well, what kind of things does she tell you? She went, well, change your underwear, brush your teeth, and stay away from these bad guys, and stay away from drugs, and don't get into any fights. The same kind of stuff the mothers would say.
Right.
And he said when his mother died, all these butterflies appeared outside the window. And then after he recovered, he was fully recovered. He wasn't hearing the voices anymore. And it was one of the last appointments I had with him. He said, my mother wants to tell you something. And I'm like, oh, well, what's she have to say? And he said, she wants to thank you for helping me. And I said, well, no problem. Ask her what she's doing over there. And she said, I'm checking people in. And I went to ask her another question, and she said, everything you need to know is in the Bible. And that was it. That's all she said. And then I checked with this guy probably a month later, and he said his mom was gone. She was no longer watching over him now that he was okay.
Right.
But that was an interesting story.
Yes, it was. What's on your plate for the next few weeks or months? There's the book.
Yeah, well, Sherry's working on it right now. We've got it almost finished. It talks about the history of schizophrenia. We go into what Van Dusen said, what Manuel Swedenborg said, and we've tried to blend all that together with what Van Dusen said, what I've experienced, what Sherry's experienced, what the history says, and bring it into one unified field, saying basically the voices are not hallucinations, and this is how they operate, and this is what you can do about them.
Right. We're looking forward to it, and I'll welcome you guys, both of you guys, on the show with great pleasure and honor. And it was really great to have you on. If you have something to say, I'll give you the final word. But I think you've done you've produced enough testimonies from your own experience as a psychotherapist and in the psychiatric world to expose the psychiatric mafia, the big pharma drug industry, and people know now that I'm hoping so that they're the voices in the schizophrenic heads and minds are not meaningless hallucinations. That's the most important thing.
No, and that they hit all of us. You know, when you get a thought in there that just flies in there and it's just bizarre and negative and awful, it didn't come from you. You know, keep in mind that thought stream is not who you are. If you could sit back and watch it, it's not who you are. You're the watcher. You know, so people need to realize that, and it's people like your listeners who have the light to see and understand this stuff and are on this frequency and have taken time out of their lives to come and hear this because they were attracted to this. They're so important in getting this out because the ivory tower is not going to touch this with a 10-foot pole. The psychiatric mafia is going to do everything they can to destroy it. The pharmaceutical industry, when they find that schizophrenia can be cured without drugs, they're not going to like that.
Right, you know? Right. Yeah, like you say, we're all concerned, and there's the dream hacking phenomenon as well going on with everyone. You know, every night when we go to sleep, but some dream incubation and interference, it does happen. But lucid dreaming, what do you think of that? Do you think people are driven by external entities, or do they drive their own thoughts towards the a reality that they see in front of them?
Well, lucid dreaming is a step into another vibrational reality. Now, I've had that happen to me a couple of times. Mm-hmm. Once traveling out of my body through these dense thickets at night, and I had no arms, I had no legs, I was just awareness. You know, it was just this ball of awareness, and I could just move through this woods and these thickets like nothing. I mean, and everything was so much crisper and sharper. It was like that was the real reality and not this one. There was another time where there was a condition, there's a story behind this, but it was a condition where all my physical senses were shut off. You know, mm-hmm. And all that there was my consciousness. And the situation was fearful, so I wasn't even thinking. So everything was shut down. My body was shut down. No senses were working. My mind, and all there was I was aware that I was aware. That's what's there, you know. And we're limited by this physical input. You know, what we can see is only 1/10 of 1% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. What we're limited to is this physical input, these 5 physical senses, and there's all kinds of different realities all around us all the time. You know, that if you're open to that, you'll see it. You know,
right? Precisely, right. We have to be open-minded, but to positive energies and you know, other realms that will help us feel more conscious than unconscious. So thank you so much, Terry. It was a great pleasure, and we'll see you again very soon with Sherry. And Godspeed for your projects, your upcoming projects, and we're behind you.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next time, guys, on DTV. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.